Okay, then I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Fairfax Town Council. And I guess first thing on the item is Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, Michelle, could you do a roll call vote, or roll
Sure.
call?
Councilmember Goddard,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kohler,
Yes.
Council Mayor Reed,
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman,
Yes.
and Mayor Lax.
Here. Okay, and then next on the item is approval of our agenda and affidavit of posting.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, and because this is a special meeting, we don't have the time for public expression that we oftentimes do at regular meetings. So with that, we'll have our agenda to introduce and adopt an urgency ordinance regarding telecommunications. And Garrett, would you be so kind as to lead us with a staff report?
Sure. Okay, so where I thought I would start from some background is, rather than going through too much, would really start with your meeting from September 5th. So as you're aware, on September 5th, the council met to discuss the general policy issues related to small cell facilities, wireless communication facilities. You received public comment, and direction at that time was to send the item to the Planning Commission to, in essence, develop an ordinance or recommend an ordinance for council consideration. And that would have involved development standards, application requirements, locational configuration preferences, things like that. And so, since that time, the FCC met today on their ruling. They did vote to approve their ruling. The final order, however, that still needs to come out, and how it all works is ultimately it takes effect after it's published in the Federal Register, and then it takes effect 30 days after that. So that'll be sometime in early November for that ruling to actually take effect. But in essence, what that ruling does, it preempts, as we know, preempts local authority. So it kind of creates the time limit, shot clocks by which you approve applications, and then creates all these, I'll refer to them as what they refer to as reasonable standards, not creating a burden, and so on. So it pretty much takes away whatever control we have. But that being said, I think given the FCC ruling, or at the time when we scheduled this, the proposed ruling, increase in the industry and possible locations for 5G, we thought it was clear that perhaps it would be good to have an urgency ordinance for the council, just because we don't have any criteria in place. Only criteria we have are really for cell towers in our town code that was developed in 1999, never been amended, doesn't reflect any laws passed since then or FCC rulings. So we thought it'd be important to be here tonight to talk about urgency ordinance. And if you do adopt an urgency ordinance, which is 4 out of 5 of you, or a super majority, then that takes effect immediately. And in terms of the process, how that works is that urgency ordinance is a temporary ordinance, and what happens is the Planning Commission, in terms of process, we would go back to the Planning Commission, whatever you approve tonight, we take that to them in October, and then theoretically we'd come back to you if there's time in November to consider the regular ordinance, which may be the exact same thing, or maybe the Planning Commission might recommend some revisions. So that's in terms of how the process works for emergency ordinance. Now, in terms of this urgency ordinance, what we did was, based at the last meeting, we heard that people had referred to what Mill Valley did. Mill Valley adopted an urgency ordinance, and Mill Valley's ordinance was modeled after San Anselmo's and Ross's ordinance. And so what we did, in working with the town attorney, is we took the Mill Valley ordinance and modified it to basically fit within Fairfax's code, which means the numbering, zoning designations, a couple other things. But in essence, if you read the two, for the most part, it's the Mill Valley. Sections read exactly the same if you just change City of Mill Valley to Town of Fairfax. So that's a little background. In terms of the key revisions, in this ordinance. What it does was we ensure that FCC standards regulating radio frequency emissions are strictly followed. There's a requirement that they have to provide documentation, and then we have once a year we could retain a consultant at their expense to perform the required testing. I do need to note that it is debatable whether that is allowed under either state, federal, FCC rulings. Annual, it's definitely not allowed quarterly, so that's why we did annual. What we did is we also established a process, and the process is a CUP, conditional use permit, is required. Conditional use permit also includes a design review, so there's no separate design review board. That doesn't exist. It's the planning commission sits as both. But design review, all those standards are all considered within that conditional use permit, and the use permit would expire in 10 years unless some kind of renewal is requested. And again, my understanding is that's a requirement under state law to have a minimum of 10 years for the use permit. In terms of the application process, it really details all the information needed, documentation, so visual studies, noise studies, do they have the right to install certain equipment and so on. So that really lays it out, plus allows the town to retain a consultant specialist to help us review the application at the cost of the applicant. One of the key things, and this is similar to Mill Valley's, is we prohibit any installation of any type of equipment in residential zones on private property, as well as in the public right-of-way. So if you're in a residential zone and you have a street in a residential zone, then nothing is permitted. Wireless communication facilities are not permitted in the residential zones or the public right-of-way. What it does allow, it limits it to private property in the commercial areas, as well as to right-of-way within the commercial areas. Now, the commercial areas include things that we refer to as CH, highway commercial, CC, central commercial, CL, limited commercial, CS, I think that's commercial service, and it also includes what we refer to as public domain properties, which are town-owned properties. But the caveat there is the council has to approve anything, so if you never approve anything, it's just part of the possible locations, but obviously there's an extra step there. So that's what it allows, and it allows it in that public right-of-way that's adjacent to those commercial locations. In addition, similar to Mill Valley, and they adopted something similar to Petaluma, is we kept in the 1,500 foot distance, minimal distance between small cell attachments on the poles. So you have that, as well as can only be in the commercial area. I think, someone asked a question. The town basically is just 2 square miles. That's about 1,300 acres. Commercial represents and public domain represent less than 10% of that. So you're talking about less than 10% of the whole town could be an eligible area, The ordinance also establishes all the different design standards, appearances, concealing, hiding accessory equipment, and so on. Must comply with all ADA standards. We do impose our noise standards per our town code. Where feasible, we do require upgrades to facilities as technology becomes available so that things could be less visually intrusive. We do require that relocation, we do require the location of any of these wireless facilities if we're doing some kind of future public works type project and requires it to be moved, then they have to move it. One of the other things is, I think is the point, is the ordinance does provide exception process. If the applicant believes they want to apply for exception because they believe it violates federal or state law, then they're allowed to make that case. We actually have to have those type of provisions in the ordinance to follow state or federal law. So that's something that had to be in there, but the burden's on the applicant to prove for some reason what we're doing is violating some state or federal law. And I think initially, I talked about it requires a use permit. I think one of the things is what we talked about is there's expedited approval process, but those are for things that are referred to as eligible facilities requests under section 6409, I think A. And what that requires is if a facility falls within these guidelines, and my understanding is the example is if some reason you had a cell tower somewhere, which we don't, but if we did in the town limits, And within that initial application, you said you could have your cell tower and you could add, I'll make it up, you could add up to 2 smaller antennas on it, then that could be eligible under eligible facility requests, and it's expedited process. So what happens is the application goes in, the zoning administrator, your planning director reviews it, and then the appeal process is to the town manager. And the only reason we did that is because you only have 60 days. If you created a different appeal body, you may not be able to even get a meeting together and noticing within that 60-day period. It creates kind of a difficulty. Now, that being said, there are other portions of the code that theoretically someone could appeal, whatever town manager did. But again, the window is so small, we need to provide a mechanism so we could allow for that possibility. And then one of the things I think was
Garrett, I'm sorry, so that section, again, just to clarify, that's 64.09?
Yeah, it's section 6409A, I think.
And so the shot clock applies to these kind of co-locating
Certain
applications.
eligible facilities if it meets whatever those requirements are. And so that
So-
triggers a shot clock just for that.
So an initial application, is that subject to that 60-day shot clock?
No, it depends on what the application is. So if the FCC ruling created a shorter application or shot clock period, then that would apply. So, but I forget what they are. They're 60, 90, 150 days.
So I can
whatever
tell
they are.
you, so where the eligible facilities request comes in the 60-day shot clock is for removal or replacement of or co-location of new transmission equipment. And so if you don't meet the 60 days, it's approved.
Right.
So, you know, there would be some that would say, well, forget about the 60 days. It's just deemed approved if you don't meet that. So that's what the existing facilities request deals with.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Appreciate
So
that.
one of the things I'd like to point out is what we're doing is when we created this ordinance, we have it replaced in the existing title, Chapter 19 within the town code. And the reason for that is the Mill Valley, well, I should say our urgency ordinance, which happens to mimic Mill Valley's, adopts a process for everything. It's comprehensive. And there just wasn't time to decide if certain things should stay in or certain things should stay out. There's clearly inconsistencies between both of them, and that's something we always thought the Planning Commission, when they're considering this, could take a look and say, oh, okay, well, you know, we kind of like this, let's add this in too. Oh, okay, we can't do that anymore because that's now technically illegal under either case law or current federal state law, so let's not do that. And so that's what we thought within this process, so that's why we're proposing to replace the section entirely. But that being said, it's important to note the urgency ordinance, a regular ordinance will be coming to you that's going to replace the urgency ordinance. And one of the things I think I forgot to mention with the FCC ruling, no, I guess I did, is it actually doesn't take effect until early November. You actually have probably another council meeting prior to then. So what you could do as a matter of course is whatever Planning Commission recommends to you, you could adopt that as an urgency ordinance and also adopt it as a regular ordinance. And what happens is that takes effect, and if that got challenged, your regular ordinance would run the normal way and most likely would be in effect before anyone could really do anything. So it's a little technicality I thought I'd like to point out. So you do have time to let the Planning Commission really noodle how this would work. Some of the things you should probably know is that we really weren't able to.
Garrett, can I just interrupt? So
Sure.
just because I think you went through that really fast. I think the idea is that you were trying to convey is it's going to the Planning Commission for a regular ordinance in October. And one of the things they would do at that time is do a side-by-side analysis of old Title 19, should we adopt this tonight, bring in any gaps, not I like this, but this is necessary. And so they would bring in any things that were gaps at that point that somehow got missed by the repeal. Is that what you were trying to say?
Sure. And when I say if they like it, I think like it means do they believe this is appropriate? It's something we should keep in the ordinance, and then they could add it back in, modify it. They can modify whatever is being proposed to them. So yes, to answer your question is the Planning Commission would have at least one meeting to be able to determine what, if anything, in existing chapter 19 should be in this new ordinance.
And then I think you were saying that we also have the option, so the idea is the Planning Commission would send that to us in November, and if we wanted to, we could adopt that as an urgency ordinance to take effect and supersede this, and then move forward with the regular ordinance process as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Because you did say that quite fast.
Oh, sorry, I'll slow down. So yes, thanks for the clarification. But yes, in essence, what you'd be doing, and you've done this before for urgency ordinances and moratoriums, is you adopt the urgency ordinance, but you also adopt the regular ordinance at the same time so that you'll have your second reading the month later and then takes effect 30 days after. It's sort of a protection in case one gets challenged, you'll have your regular one in place. That's the thought pattern. And you have done that before a few years ago for, I forget, one of the moratoriums, maybe on CH to CC chain stores or something like that. But
Jared, if I can ask two quick questions. The planning staff and the planning commission will be able to give this attention in the October meeting? I mean, I assume this is well understood that this might be coming their way if we act tonight, so.
well, actually, they don't know it's coming their way because we didn't. Well, actually, I think we did point out it was coming their way. What we'll have to do is, yes, they will consider it. We have cannabis at the same time, a couple of items. So we're looking at special meetings, whether it just be those two items. And so, but the Planning Commission, to answer your question, would be they will definitely hear it in November, whether at a special meeting or a
You mean
regular
in
meeting.
October?
October.
And
Wow,
I
okay.
did watch the Planning Commission, and the chair was talking about doing a single-purpose meeting so that they could specifically cover this.
And then the other question that I was going to ask, just to clarify with regard to the previous discussion, it is possible for council to adopt an urgency ordinance at a regular meeting, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll sorry.
I'd also like to ask another, I mean, why not, instead of repealing the old Chapter 19, have it sit side by side? With this, I mean, it will create conflicts, but it's an urgency ordinance, and, you know, maybe this is the safety net for the Planning Commission being under the gun to find every last detail. I mean, there's specific things in that early chapter that reflect town policy that aren't reflected in Mill Valley's take.
So you can do that, and we're not going to receive an application, but it gets really confusing because there are clear conflicts. There are some things, I believe, that aren't allowed within existing Title 19, and I know you're going to have, if we call it the new Title 20 or whatever we're going to call it, within that it just gets confusing, but the Planning Commission can clean that up. I'd say my preference would be, because the FCC ruling is not going to take effect till early November, would be to adopt the urgency ordinance, direct the Planning Commission, you've got to recommend something to us, come back in November, and then you'll have something that's just nice and clean. But that being said, the council can do things more confusing.
I share the concern about, I think there's some good things in Title 19 that aren't in Mill Valley, that are Fairfax specific, that I want to keep in place. And I've proposed a workaround whereby we create a new section, we call this Section 20, and we keep Section 19 intact, and to the extent that there's a conflict between new Section 20 and Section 19, Section 20 will supersede it. And I think that, I'd like to have that in place until a month from now, rather than just erasing Section 19. But
Yeah, I would
we
too. I
can
mean,
get,
it's pretty easy to come up with some language, I think, that.
yeah, and I've sort of
Resolves
anticipated
conflicts.
that, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves right now. Just, are there any further clarifying questions?
Very
Did
quick.
you finish your staff report? He hasn't finished his staff report. Maybe we could let him do.
Sorry about that.
This is a complex issue.
Okay, let's see, what was I going to, oh, so I wanted to point out a little clarification from the last meeting to this meeting. So residents, the community can share their thoughts with you at this meeting. We're saying they could share whatever. And lots of things that come up have to do with environmental health concerns. As staff, all we're pointing out to the community is we're recommending to the council, whatever you adopt for the record, just don't point to the only reason we're doing it is because of environmental health concerns. So that's, you're doing it for lots of other reasons, but that's not one of the reasons that we're suggesting that you adopt it for. The practical impact may be that this ordinance addresses many of the concerns, and that'd be good. But I think for the community, I'm just pointing out that that's what the council's kind of our obligation as staff to let you know that what we're trying to avoid is if you ever got challenged, them looking at the public record and saying, well, you specifically said you did it for this reason, and that's not an allowed reason. That's our only caveat. The other thing for staff is we wanted to point out is, for the record, that even though Fairfax is only 2 square miles and commercial maybe is like 10% of the properties, we think the ordinance as proposed does provide sufficient locations to provide adequate coverage. And so that's about what we'd say. But I just wanted to point out to the community, we're not preempting you from saying anything you like, just pointing out that the council may not be able to say, oh, I like that. Yeah, that's why we're doing this. The practical effect may address it, but we're just trying to make sure we have an ordinance that at least on the surface seems defensible and there's sufficient locations to provide adequate coverage. But I think with that, I think that concludes the staff report.
Quick question. So going back to what you mentioned about PD, could you repeat that? That went awfully fast. Public domain.
So yes, so public domain are the town-owned properties and the schools. And that's included within eligible areas that some wireless communication facility can be located. Now that being said, if it's town-owned property and it's on there, then the town council would actually have to approve that. If it's in the public right-of-way, then technically that would just go through the use permit process. So in other words, town owns property just like private property owners own property. In residential areas, we're saying even if you're a private property owner, if you want to locate one of these things there, you can't, it's not permitted. And we're saying it's also not permitted in the streets in front of your homes. For here, the town, we're saying the town council would have to approve it. If it's on town property, in the public right-of-way, it would go through the regular application process. Same for the school districts. So that's the public domain zone, is basically town and school and property. Oh, I'm sorry, and the county library property.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, then can I have a quick show of hands of how many people would like to speak this evening? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, if we get, I see about a dozen hands. If we get more than that, we'll start with 3 minutes per person. If we have more than about a dozen, I'll probably cut it down to 2 minutes per person just to get through.
Mayor, I had one quick follow-up question. Is the commercial recreation zone also included in those commercial things? Because I mean, we have one commercial recreation, and that's the Marin County Country Club, which is, for all intents and purposes right now, not, I mean, it's a residential, it's being used residentially.
Right, but it's a commercial zone that it's a legal non-conforming with all those residential units on it.
Correct.
So we include it. Now, that being said, as the council, as you go through your deliberations, you could tweak some things. My only caveat is just keep in mind the sufficient locations, adequate coverage type of guideline.
Yeah, well, it's big, but it's, yeah, out of the thick of things.
Sure. Okay. So then with that, why don't we have public comment? If you're comfortable, please state your name and where you live. It's helpful for us to know if we're being addressed by Fairfax residents and voters. And why don't you start things off, Frank?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor and council members. Frank Yeager, Meadowway, Fairfax. So I wonder why your law firm, BK&K, is falling in line with President Trump's controlled Federal Communications Commission. There are 482 cities in California and thousands across the USA, and many are challenging the FCC. From the staff report, it says the federal law significantly limits the town's ability to regulate WCFs. So the question I have is, where is the case law that backs that up? For 5G, it is so new, there probably is not any case law that backs up the claim that the town has no ability to regulate WCFs. State law grants statutory franchise authority to cities and towns for public utilities, and a town council needs to see a copy of all of our franchises that we have right now. So there's cable TV franchises, telephone franchises, PG&E franchises, and I think the council needs to see a copy of that to see just what kind of authority you do actually have over franchises. One of the concerns we have is that the current codes, Chapter 1904 and 1908, were used as part of the basis to control the deployment of smart meters in Fairfax, and if those existing codes disappear, I'm not sure this new ordinance is going to cover the infrastructure PG&E needs for smart meters. The staff report mentions facilities in public domain zones, and for instance, they mentioned the county library and town hall. The county library is owned, the library in Fairfax is owned by the county of Marin. I think you need to talk to the county of Marin before you talk about what you're going to allow on the county library site. And number two, cities all over the state are now prohibiting installation of these antenna systems on their firehouses because of the danger they propose they create for firefighters who have to sleep in those firehouses during the nighttime. The urgency ordinance gives a telecom applicant the right to claim an exemption over any section of the ordinance, and that has to be removed from this ordinance. You don't want to, right off the bat, give the telecom industry an exemption to any part of your ordinance. Line 28, it talks about the current code is not designed to address wireless telecom facilities in a public right-of-way. It actually is, and in the code sections, if you read them, they address public right-of-ways.
Sorry, Frank, what was that citation?
Okay, I'm getting close to the end. Do not repeal the existing ordinance. The bottom of the large box, line 230, talks about the different zones. CH zone, we need to protect the residential uses in CH and CC. Commercial service has no residential uses. In CL zone, how do we protect the residential uses in the limited commercial zones? And the CR zone, as Councilmember Reed mentioned, there are 40 residences down there, and how are we going to protect those residents if in fact they're designated as a priority area? So you got to eliminate preferences numbers 4, 5, and 6, and protect residences in number 1 CH and number 2 CC. On the appeals, the appeal says the telecom agency gets the right to appeal, and it goes to the town manager, and the town manager decision is final. That has to be changed. I mean, Fairfax has long allowed a public citizen the right to appeal a determination to the town council, and that appeal right has to be put into this ordinance. And we don't rewrite the appeal section giving resident and property owners the right to appeal. It says the effect on state law, town may grant an exception to any of those requirements. That's on line 1200 of the new ordinance, and drop this section. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Garrett?
So I forgot to mention one key thing with regard to our town attorney and BBK, Best and Krieger. So the town is actually part of a coalition that's challenging the FCC ruling. The coalition actually consists of special districts, cities, towns, and actually associations of cities. All told, it represents about 31 million people over 11 states, including the District of Columbia. And so what we've done, we've joined this coalition. They did submit to the records the FCC challenging their order. What will happen is they're waiting for the final order, and most likely, depending on how it comes out, most likely they'll file an appeal. So Fairfax is actively, and our town attorney is actually the lead the firm is actually the lead in this coalition. They put this coalition together specifically to challenge this FCC order, as well as to potentially, depending on the final order, to appeal the decision.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that information. Okay, who else would like to come forward and speak on this issue?
Hi, Alexander Binnick. I'm speaking on behalf of the Detoxics Institute in Fairfax. And John, page I left before, that was for me. So first of all, thanks to the staff for working diligently under urgency conditions to put together this draft ordinance. As I mentioned here, I'm not going to be speaking now about the issue of accessibility to emergency communications, but just about the specific nature of this agenda. At the last meeting, it was the council's expressed desire that a draft ordinance be made as robust as possible. Though the proposed draft has some good features, it can and should be improved and made more robust right now before the urgency ordinance is adopted and implemented, particularly important given the likely pending action by the FCC. Here are my specific recommendations. First of all, maximum power and co-location. Clarify that co-located facilities, antennas, cell signal boosters, and so on, if each were to be operated at maximum power, would in the aggregate nevertheless meet the FCC limits for radio frequency transmissions. This is important rather than just looking at separate measurements. There might be 4 of them co-located, and we have to look at the total and based upon their maximum power output. This also should be spelled out in section 19.04, 100, conditions of approval, sections 6 and 7. Also clarify what will happen if co-located facilities in the aggregate, once installed, exceed those limits. I believe this is not currently clear in the draft. Will all the companies have to remove their equipment, or what? I don't believe it's clarified. Second, undergrounding. For cables and accessory equipment for facilities in the public right-of-way, language should say that ground-level equipment must be undergrounded. Remove the language in a few places that says if feasible. The Petaluma ordinance doesn't have language referring to if feasible. They just say it has to be undergrounded. Also, the Petaluma ordinance also specifies undergrounded within 3 feet of the utility pole on which the antennas are mounted. That's a requirement that we should have in ours as well. The justification for the undergrounding requirement is to prevent visual blight and potential interference with the flow of pedestrian traffic, for example, ADA. This language is already in our draft ordinance, but it should be applied in this case. And this language should also be spelled out in the conditions of approval section. Third, location. As is the case in the Petaluma ordinance, any such telecommunications facility must be at least 500 feet from the nearest residential unit, including those present in zoning districts other than strictly residential ones. That is, it should apply to upstairs dwelling units in commercial buildings, the units along Elsie Lane, and so on. The same 500-foot requirement should apply to proximity to Fairfax parks, athletic fields, and designated open space in non-residential zoning districts. Note that because of the severability clause, even in the unlikely event that a court ultimately found this requirement to not be legally enforceable, the remainder of the ordinance would continue to apply. And finally, permit fees. In addition to a conditional use permit fee and an encroachment permit fee, a wireless telecommunications facility permit fee will be required. Is there a legal limit on the size of this fee? How large can it be made legally? I'm sure that findings can be made to justify it. That's something I'd like you to think about and perhaps include in this urgency ordinance. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thank you, Alexander. These are all very good suggestions.
Hi, Roberta Anthes, 2 Snowden, Fairfax. First of all, thank you for calling this meeting. I know it was a real scurry for everybody and for working on this ordinance. I agree with Council Members Reed and Lax that until we can combine these 2 ordinances through the Planning Commission, I think we should leave the current one intact and then work as hard as we can to combine the 2 ordinances down the road. We'd lose too many protections, in particular the foundation for maintaining the smart meter ban, which is very important to most people here. I have other suggestions, but I think some people already covered them. Remove any zones from the priority list that have any residences in them. That would be numbers 4, 5, and 6 on item 313. Provide buffer zones between non-residential and residential zones. Provide an avenue to notify the public of any application. Provide an avenue for public discussion and appeal. Since NEPA has been sort of completely undermined, that was the only discussion or the only avenue for the public to weigh in the past. That's been eliminated pretty much, so our ordinance has to add that. Remove the telecom's right to claim exception over any section of this ordinance. I know there might be some legal problems with that. And disallow facilities on property with public domain zoning. I'm very happy to hear that we joined the coalition. I wasn't aware that we had, but I'm very happy to hear that. I think that this is a moment in time. This is about 5G and it's about Fairfax, but it's about a lot more than that. We have a federal agency taking away the authority of local elected officials and the people and giving it to private corporate interests for profit at the expense of our health, our safety, our privacy, our rights of way, our freedom of choice. And this is something that's really ugly. And I think we really have to fight this hard in court. I believe... I think I'll say that again and get more. No. I think it's really important that we have the ordinance, the urgency ordinance in place to protect ourselves, because who knows what will happen down the road, who knows what will happen in court. We have to have that. I think we need to consider our current ordinance because it's very strong in certain areas. We don't want to lose any of those protections. But we have to fight this. So I just want to thank you for listening to that and for accepting all my many, many emails. Please go on, be tough, defend us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Roberta.
Hello, I'm Jess Lerner, Canyon Road, and I've met with most of you and gotten to know you recently on this issue. And we're turning over a letter to you that includes most of our asks that some of you have seen. This is our final copy, and you will also see that it is signed by many Fairfax residents as well as other local Marin residents who have expressed concern, as well as business owners, on this issue. The reason we're here right now is because we believe we deserve to have a choice. We're creating this ordinance so that we can, as a town, determine what happens to our community now and in the future, rather than the telecom industry in a Trump FCC. Instead of allowing industry to determine what happens in our town commons and next to our homes and to our bodies, let's make the strongest ordinance possible to protect and honor the well-being and safety of residents, as you have all promised to do. So this letter has a lot of our asks, and it addressed the proposed ordinance that has come out that we've read. A lot of the details in there will speak to those. I echo and agree with what Frank Egger talked about, and Roberta as well. So you can take a look at that, and I'm just going to highlight 3 of those right now. Our first and most important one is to not repeal the current Chapter 19 telecom ordinance. We feel they can exist side by side for a while as you address them, and it contains vital policy right now, and including rules surrounding smart meters, which we don't want to repeal. We don't want Fairfax to go backwards. So that's really critical that we keep that right now and that we don't repeal it, and both of them can exist while you're working on this current ordinance. We're saying it shouldn't preempt the old one. Another issue that I wanted to address is we've talked a little bit about setbacks, And I saw that you have in the proposed ordinance 1,500 feet between the facilities, and we had also asked for setbacks between residential and commercial. That's really critical for people who live in those areas, for places like preschools, healthcare facilities, things like that. So 5G presents ADA issues related to public access, as ADA Title III prohibits discrimination by public places and commercial facilities. I myself, as well as others, suffer from a disability related to being electrically sensitive and can't go to these places most of the time. So a business could be a daycare facility, doctor's office, health food restaurant, wellness clinic, but that could prevent those people from going there and working if there were 5G installed. So how will our ordinance accommodate those with disabilities? Yes, you have a challenge legally. Where do we put them if we don't put them in the commercial or the town commons? That's really a sacred place in Fairfax. But where will the radiation-free zones be? So they should at least be in people's homes in addition to public places, and homes abut those commercial areas. So we need to look at that and take that seriously with some kind of setback and buffer. Lastly, I only have a few moments left. So I have one more thing I want to read to you. Last night I was in San Anselmo at the town council meeting where they were discussing this same issue. And as they reviewed their ordinance, there was a unanimous council that found it was not tight enough and did not protect the residents nearly enough. Health and honoring personal choice were their central concerns. And here's what Council Member Matt Brown had to say. We need to go as far as we can, even if defying the law. We need to take this as high as we can. The telecoms couldn't get Congress to work with them, so they went to the Trump FCC. No one I know moving in these circles supports it, not one politician or council member. This defies everything that is American. If someone wants to radiate themselves in their own home, that's up to them, but we need to recognize the people walking down the street, our community, and protect them. This is the beginning of a revolution. We have to go. We have to go beyond policy changes. 5 bars isn't worth compromising the health of our community, regardless of that 1996 law.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry,
So
Jessica, can you wrap up real
I'm
quick?
wrapping up. So I know that I'm on 0, but Matt Brown, the council member who I invited to be here, isn't here yet. So therefore, I'm just going to take a minute of his time, and if that's okay, or less than a minute.
We have a lot of folks waiting, so
Sure.
we should
Just very
move
quickly,
on.
I wanted to address the issue of these 5G facilities are a fire hazard, and that's something that doesn't come up much. We talk a lot about how important connectivity is. They are an incredible hazard, so they create dryness through radiation, they desiccate the land, there's sparks that can be caused by wires, but most of all, they're on poles. Down poles are the reason for the Malibu fire, the Santa Rosa fire, and the recent Lagunitas fire. We know that's an issue. We don't want to put ourselves more at risk in this particular geography. I think that should be looked at as something legal you guys can address in this ordinance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good points.
Hello, Mayor and council members. My name is Paige Hudson. I'm a Marin County native and have lived here my whole life. I'm currently residing in Mill Valley, but I'm very active in speaking to communities across the county and with the Board of Supervisors because of the imperative nature of this issue. You've heard some great suggestions from the last 3 speakers about pragmatic changes we'd like to see happen in this ordinance and the method in which you might do that. I'd like to talk a little bit about Garrett's comments about the issues of health and being very leery about public comment on that. I think we have enough reasons outside the context of that, although we all appreciate the vital importance of looking at the health hazards and the impact on our well-being and public safety. But I think if you also look at, and Jess touched on this, the issues around fire safety, which is first and foremost in our mind in this fire season, and we're seeing that the new norm is it's a almost year-round fire season. Jess mentioned a couple reasons why it has contributed to fires, but it also inhibits our ability to use effective communications within the fire department to our communities, which is well documented both in the Napa, Sonoma, and Santa Rosa fires of last fall, and also well documented recently in the fires we had this summer. Even in the fire that we saw in Lagunitas, people were having to go find first responders to get information about what was happening with the fire. So clearly, not only does it create a fire danger, but it also inhibits our ability to respond when there is and alert the public. I want to also touch a little bit on this issue issue of property values. And while, of course, not as imperative in the short term related to public health and safety, it still is an issue that we should look at very closely. The National Institute of Science, Law, and Public Policies survey states that between 20 and 30%, a 20 and 30% decrease in property value if your home is near a cell tower station. 94% of the survey participants stated that they would not rent or buy a property that had cell phones near it. So with these small cell towers moving into our community, you can see this could impact every house in the Fairfax area. And I wanted to also mention that almost 80% said that under no circumstances would they live in a home or an apartment that had cell phone towers near them. In the last few moments, I just want to address something of a larger scale, and that is that I think all of you have this, are kind of at a unique moment in your lives, and all of us, to create a legacy, a statement that puts your residents and your constituents and your families and your neighbors and your friends in a place in which we put their needs, public safety, health, and well-being above the profits of telecommunications agencies, and having the courage to do so is what we look to our leaders for, to represent what this community is telling you loud and clear. We don't want 5 bars over the well-being and health of our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Sean Chertel. I'm a Fairfax resident. This room is obviously full of people who are very worried about cell phone related EMFs. Is there anybody here who is not worried about cell phone? Okay, one. Brave soul, brave soul. But it's worth pointing out that people who aren't worried about something aren't typically the ones who fill the room at public hearings, right? So I hope you'll take into account that there very well could be a silent majority of your constituents who aren't worried and subsequently aren't here. I'm here because I'm afflicted with the crazy notion that policy ought to be based on facts, not cherry-picked studies or scary blog posts, but actual scientific consensus. So I'd like to illustrate the problem with an example that I think most of us can agree on. If you start with the idea that climate change is a hoax, and then you Google for evidence to support that idea, you'll find it. You can find studies, expert testimony, petitions signed by climate scientists, and honestly, it can be very convincing. The only problem is that it's categorically wrong. And we know it's wrong because a global consortium of climate scientists working with the International Panel on Climate Change has analyzed all available research on the topic and published its consensus view, which holds that man-made climate change is, of course, unequivocally real. And there's no individual outlier study or expert opinion or scary blog post that trumps the global scientific consensus on climate change. Now, climate change deniers will often, at this point, attack scientists, saying things like scientists can make mistakes, or many scientists are in the pockets of big corporations, and so on. And of course, they're right. And that actually explains some of those fringe outlier studies and opinions. But it cannot explain the overwhelming scientific consensus view. And if you don't believe me, you may not understand the process that leads to published scientific consensus. And I would invite you to take the time to look into it. Now, similar to the consensus on climate change, a global consortium of radiation experts working with the World Health Organization has spent 13 years analyzing literally all of the research on the subject of cell phone-related EMFs. And after painstakingly reviewing every single word of every single page of 143 peer-reviewed studies, they published their consensus view, finding that cell phone-related EMFs, quote, do not produce any known adverse health effect, unquote. You can not like it, but that's what they said.
Okay, folks.
Dislike it. You can
we
dislike it,
may,
that's
you
fine.
may not agree with what he has to say, but
You can dislike
please.
the consensus of the IPCC if you're a climate change denier,
Folks,
too.
please, let's let him have his say. But John, if you could
Almost
wrap
done.
up, because you're
Similar consensus
time.
views have been published by many other websites, including the WHO, the IARC, the American Cancer Society, and many others. If you believe EMFs are harmful, I'm afraid you disagree with global scientific consensus on the matter. In conclusion, I would ask my intelligent and obviously well-intentioned neighbors who are still worried about EMFs to please consider, if you start with a conclusion and Google for evidence to support it, you'll find it. You can find very convincing evidence.
Okay, John, can you wrap up then?
30 seconds.
Make it 10.
I'm the only person speaking here on this side, so give me a second, okay?
All right.
You can find very convincing evidence that climate change is a hoax, that vaccines cause autism, that chemtrails cause headaches, and yes, that EMFs cause cancer. But if you really want to get to the truth, please don't do that. Instead, please Google for scientific consensus on
John.
the topic at hand.
John,
That's it.
thank you. Okay. Yes, Andy, go ahead.
Good evening, members of the council. Andy Perry, I live in the Cascades. We are faced, you guys are
Folks,
using my time.
Yeah.
You won't want to do that.
Folks, can you please
We are
simmer
faced,
down?
we are faced tonight with federal and state agency telecom written rules that will have an adverse effect on the well-being of the Fairfax community. These rules strip us of local control, and as I see it, strip you, the elected officials, of one of your most fundamental mandates, which is protecting the well-being of the residents of Fairfax. It is obvious why the FCC and telecoms have prohibited health effects from the debate. Their assertion that biological effects are ambiguous and unproven is absurd. In fact, they wouldn't have focused on that so much if that was not the case. This is the same kind of language that the tobacco industry used while there was untold suffering from people smoking cigarettes for decades. The scientific literature is anything but ambiguous, contrary to what we just heard. This statement is flat out wrong and is the lie that the newest FCC rules teeter upon. The town of Fairfax is in a vice right now. It's being squeezed on one hand by the telecoms and on the other hand by the need to protect the well-being of citizens of Fairfax. From a sterile, legal, by-the-book perspective, it may seem perfectly rational to simply play by the rules that exist at the federal and state level on this matter. If we were obedient little herd of sheep, we would simply follow the rules. We are not obedient blind sheep here. We are Fairfax, and under these absurd and obtrusive circumstances, we need to do everything we can to fight back to ensure that the safety and well-being of our community is kept intact. We must be first and foremost in our actions tonight. This must be first and foremost in our actions tonight. Tonight we are working on an urgency ordinance, but Fairfax needs to make a commitment to continue being part of the bigger dialogue, as Garrett indicated earlier, pushing back against state and federal rules that impact local control. The proposed ordinance that has been prepared I found to be disappointingly weak and will not provide the protections that are needed for our health and well-being. The letter that the 5G Free Task Force has submitted to you has many suggestions that can be used to interrupt this abuse of our town by the telecoms and the Trump FCC and help protect our community. We ask that you seriously consider all of the 18 items in that letter. One of the most challenging points in our ask involves antenna setbacks and interval distances between antennas. I'm deeply concerned that the residents living in mixed-use zoning areas are going to be sacrificed. Your proposed ordinance, in order to comply with the FCC rules, de facto sacrifices many members of our community living in these areas by allowing antennas to be installed there. This is flat out wrong and cannot stand. We need to figure out a way that we can protect all of our community members, including those living in mixed-use zones. I will not stand here and say we cannot keep this equipment out of our town. We can keep this equipment out of our town. That's exactly what the telecoms want us to think, that we can't do something because they have written rules and given them to the FCC to impose on the public. One wise member of the community described Fairfax as high-hanging fruit for the telecoms because the investment may not be worth it for them to come to town. Let us put Fairfax into orbit regarding high-hanging fruit, and so that no telecoms will want to come with this technology anywhere near Fairfax. And equally important, let us Be an example of wisdom, courage, and creativity for other communities across the U.S. One more quick point. Tonight, we have a great opportunity to significantly change history by protecting local control, by protecting health and well-being. I urge this council and the members of this community in this room, all of you here tonight, to work together tonight in a constructive dialogue to create the best ordinance possible and to bring our skill and, again, our creativity in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Helene Robertson, and I actually live in San Anselmo, but my husband has his studio, and we have a rental here in Fairfax. So we're real concerned about this, and last night there was a pretty good meeting in San Anselmo that I took part in, and we're just hoping Fairfax goes along with our thinking. So let me get my notes straight here. But now, after 4G has been here for quite some time, we're faced with a much more insidious and dangerous technology, which they refer to as 5G. 4G was able to be put on cell towers and stuff throughout the community, but 5G operates at 10 times the speed of 4G, and to implement it, it means installing thousands of small base stations on utility poles and buildings that will send enormously and dangerously powerful direct beams called phased arrays. Cell phone towers are already linked to depression, increase in cancer, tumors, sleep problems, anxiety, ADHD, autism, and more. As far back as 2011, the World Health Organization classified radio frequency emissions as a 2B carcinogen based on an increase of glioma, which is a malignant type of brain cancer associated with wireless phone use. The International Association of Firefighters opposes cell phone towers on their fire stations after trying them and experiencing problems like headaches, memory issues, confusion, and weakness. Look at how the use of phones has increased today. Every kid and person in a restaurant or on the street has his phone in his hand. That's enough radiation right there. And RG would increase the exposure to 10 times what we now have, and with a much more dangerous delivery system. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't feel it. We've become so dependent on 4G that we don't even think about what it might be doing. Now 5G is about to enter our lives and neighborhoods. Once unleashed, there's no turning back. I would urge Fairfax to follow Mill Valley's lead and say no to 5G in residential areas. We must keep installations far away from our homes, our kids, and from near our schools, senior homes, and any places where gatherings are held. I also ask that your ordinance and application make RF testing as rigorous as possible. Require testing on a consistent, frequent basis, and require additional testing based on surrounding topography. Please include these conditions in your permit to ensure compliance. I'd like to see all communities join us.
I'm sorry, Helene, can you wrap up?
I can wrap up.
Thank you.
Yes. Let's create a revolution and tell the companies that are anxious to blanket us in harmful emissions to hit the road. Thanks.
Hello again. My name is Katrina Peterson, currently resident of Lagunitas, but I also work in Fairfax and have lived in San Anselmo for many years. So first of all, I want to thank you for holding this special meeting and taking into account last time's the recommendations of different people. So I just want to first clarify that 5G can mean two things. We can say 5G is fifth generation, like we have 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. But the truth is, we don't know what kind of frequencies are going to be installed with the fifth generation. And research actually says that different countries and different states can put different kinds of frequencies for those 5Gs. And that's very important, and I'm specifically saying that because I would like something included in your resolution, in your amendment, that it's within a certain bandwidth. And that has a lot of implications, not just in terms of health. I am EHS sensitive, which is electromagnetically field sensitive. I have my cell phone off most of the time, and I only have the 3G. And anytime I have to touch my cell phone, my fingers get burnt. That's not even 5G. So I'm coming here as part of one of the canaries in the coal mine for you guys. So 1,500 feet is not even a lap. That's not much. 1,500 feet. So if you're basically looking at Marin County, especially along Sir Francis Drake, we had an enclave of different small towns, one after the other, which are basically commercial property all the way along. So does that mean we're going to have small cell towers on every single pole, every 3 houses all along the way? Does it mean we're going to have on the same pole 5G cell tower, a 4G cell tower, and a 3G cell tower? And what does that mean in terms of the weight on the pole? I was just evacuated 2 weeks ago because of fire in my valley. So I was evacuated in the night because I was one of the people living there. And a few days later, PG&E comes in with all their tree cutting machines because it was a fire hazard that the pole had actually caused the fire. So they were going all along to cut a lot of the tree branches and even the trees, whole trees. So my concern, just from that recent thing, how is this 4G, 5G cell towers placed on all these poles going to affect in terms of just all the trees being cut down because there's going to be a fire hazard on top of it? So very, very real, immediate thing that just happened that I didn't even know before. So fire. What about the schools? How many schools along the way? When you drive through Sir Francis Drake in the morning.
Oh, Katrina, if you could wrap up.
Yeah, it's basically one school after another. So what is the how many feet from the nearest school are you going to have, not just between poles? This is very important. Children's brains are much more susceptible than adult brains as well. So I'll wrap it up. We're not Luddites. We actually like technology, but we want responsible use of technology. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kim Han. I've lived in Marin my entire life, and now I live in San Rafael, where I've been for over 40 years. Thank you so much for letting me speak tonight. I would like to address the issue of fiber optics, if I may, because it's directly related to what you're talking about in your ordinance. Much has been said already about this superior alternative to 5G. You have been told that it is easily 10 times the speed of 5G, carries zero health risks, will not decrease property values, will cost less over time, causes no fire risk, and is secure and not hackable. But little has been said so far about how we all got to this point in history. I will draw from the Lost Arts radio audio on the homepage of mystreetmychoice.com and from the Book of Broken Promises by Bruce Kushnick. You can Google Kushnick, Kushnick, and find articles that he has posted over the years. He really knows his stuff. Say you have a good friend who has a thriving business. You have worked as an employee of his company for almost 20 years since the 90s, brought him home to dinner, and taken care of his kids when he went on vacation with his wife. And one day you learn that he has been docking your paycheck every month for $7 and pocketing the money. And not just your paycheck, he's done this to all 200 of his employees. What kind of a friend is that? Since the mid-1990s, the state public telecom utilities have collected tens of billions of dollars from landline customers for the purpose of upgrading copper wire lines to fiber optic service. Some of the work was done, especially in the East Coast, but then the parent holding companies of these state public telecom utilities, AT&T, Verizon, CenturyLink, and Frontier, pocketed the money and never delivered the promised fiber optic service. Instead, they fraudulently transferred these funds to their private wireless subsidiaries to build out 4G LTE. We are talking about the use of public monies for private gain. The FCC knows all about this, and in fact, they went one step further. They aided and abetted this fraud of the American people, and now they are going to turn around and charge us more money to use their 5G network. That, and this is the truly twisted part of this story, depends entirely on fiber optics to activate the 5G antennas. Yes, the phone companies are going to lay the rest of the fiber optic cable that we already have paid for to hook up the 5G antennas that will radiate us and make us sick so that they can charge us to use this inferior technology to do what is already being done with cable and copper lines at only a smidgen less speed. How about them apples? Because the telecoms began the laying of the fiber optic cable in Marin, and because George Lucas has already laid some down in downtown Fairfax, this is a perfect opportunity for Fairfax to intercede after the telecoms come in and complete their project to prepare for the installation of the 5G antennas. Because the fiber optic cable that they will be laying has already been paid for by the people of this town who had a copper wire phone line, and I venture to say that's almost everybody in this town. The city of Fairfax could take it back legally. It could then hire a contractor to install this short little connection of this tiny cable to every home and generate money for the city coffers. They could do this in conjunction with all the towns of Marin and operate on the county level to create, like my friend Jim Heddle, and I do mean a friend because he has never stolen a thing from me, suggested at the Board of Supervisors meeting just last week. Marin can create a fiber optic system that will sister Marin Clean Energy and be a shining star for the rest of the country to emulate. The only thing Fairfax has to do is grow a pair.
Okay, we appreciate that advice. Kim, if you could
Can
wrap
I
up
finish?
though.
I have one sentence.
10 seconds.
One sentence.
All right.
You may think that it is a weird thing for a person like me to say, but I am living proof that Asian men have testicles too.
We never doubted that. We're not dealing with fiber optic, but we will be taking that up at our next meeting, so tune in.
Hi, my name is Robert Ernst. I want to thank you so much for listening and learning, as all of us do, in a community effort to try and understand and keep in consideration real people as opposed to those of power or property or something I really despise, which corporations are people too. You know, they don't have a heart, is the deal. It doesn't tick. I've been made an activist for 3 reasons. One, I am a teacher. I lost a student before 21. I think you've probably, most of you, I've spoken to you before, I've heard the story. He has the most hooked up kid ever, had a Bluetooth in his left side of his head since he was 10 years old. He didn't live to be 21, a great human being. And he also lived in a tower, oh, thank you very much. And he lived in a tower with a cell tower about 60 feet from his bedroom window, which had a perfect throw to it. My partner and love of my life came down with electromagnetic sensitivity less than an hour after they put a smart meter unknowingly to her on the house. I came home and saw it. She was suffering from angina, migraines, a panic attack. It was 8 years ago. It continues. Her life is severely limited. We live out without electricity over half the time. The thing that I'm really enthused about, and particularly last night, is the analogy that if Jerry Brown can fight federal law as our state governor, we can certainly fight the powers that be too. And it was a wonderful meeting and a sense of community. And a sense of community here, and it means that like we can actually, something I've never really consciously experienced in my life, and I'm almost 40. Jack Benny, for those of you who remember. I've never experienced such a sense of ability that, like, I live in a place that I might have something to say about something, that I might have a control, and that I might have a freedom to live in a place that's free and clear and able to breathe. And I think fiber optics are safer. You've just heard the facts. You'll probably hear more. Safer, faster. We already own it. And there's nothing more I'd rather see than this town make a few bucks by owning the rights to their own utility. And I think that speaks more than I can say. So I will just, I will just say this little ditty. No more G5 for me. No más 5G para mí. Repeat that, usted. No more 5G for me. No más 5G para mí. Y todo. Huh?
Okay,
y todo?
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Mallory Geithheim, Willow Avenue. Thank you for doing this, you guys. The first thing I want to ask or suggest is if you haven't networked with Petaluma, Mill Valley, and and Sonoma, the places that are taking a stand, I really want to suggest that you do this and encourage you to do this with the people who are at your level at their towns. So we're not going to talk about health, but we are going to talk about fires. And I think that's a really big risk here. So far, we've been mostly luckier than most, and I'd like to keep it that way. I just saw a picture of these towers and I have a big pole outside my house with more than enough crap on it. And I don't want that thing outside my window. And I don't think anybody else would want that. I have a friend who works in the telecommunications. He has a company. And he said the only thing this is about, it's about AT&T and Verizon wanting to come into our homes, put the 5G so they will make more money. They're in bed with the government. We've lost the EPA. We've lost everything that, we allow fracking. We have all this crap because of what the government is doing. And it's trickling down here with this issue. We don't need to support these guys who are being in bed with the government at our expense. And I want to see that not to happen. Somebody at the last meeting said civil disobedience. If we have to do that, let's just do that. And we pay our lawyer and we pay all these consultants. Let's get somebody there who wants to go in court and defend us after we do the civil disobedience deal. Because this is really big for us and for our town. I am totally in favor of the fiber optics as the way to go. I don't use Wi-Fi in my house. I'm plugged in. I can sleep well at night, and I think there's a big reason for that, aside from years of therapy. But I think there's a really good reason for that. I am willing to pay more taxes to do this, and if there are anybody else who are willing to pay more taxes, I'm with them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leah Wildflower, and I work at my studio in School Street Plaza, and I live in Fairfax. And I just really want to express my thanks to you guys for taking this on at such a short notice and for really listening to all of us with our huge concerns. I don't want to repeat what anybody else said, except that I have a personal interest in the mixed use setbacks, and because my studio is in School Street Plaza, I'm really close to the library, I'm really close to downtown, and I'm really close to all the people that live in the second stories of all the businesses downtown. And I'm just really hoping that will be considered as you deliberate what we're going to go forward with. And sadly, I know for myself and my next door neighbor, Rachel Breeze, that neither one of us can handle even the Wi-Fi, and we're Ethernet wired, and we can do our healing arts practices because we have reduced the regular Wi-Fi, but both of us feel that we will definitely have to close our businesses and leave town if this comes in too close to our precious and quirky School Street Plaza. So, I just I'm going to give you a list of 10 business owners that have businesses downtown that are opposed to the 5G and don't want it near their businesses. And I won't take up time with that, but I'm just going to pass this along to you. And I thank you again. I really appreciate you and your concerns for our health, safety, and welfare.
Okay, thank you.
This is a very significant time in our ongoing, and this is a very significant subject. Now, I don't want to be a ray of sunshine, and I know this isn't something you'd want to talk about on the first date, but there is a depopulation agenda. And make no mistake, this is the culling that the controllers crave. This is very serious business. We're in a corporatocracy. The FCC and the FDA have been reduced to advocacy lobbyists for this corporatocracy and are far from looking after our interests. And you know, one of the benchmark studies for this stuff is right here adjacent to the Sutro Tower, where the people's proximity and the duration in which they live to the tower directly correlated with their cancers and leukemias and mental health. And it's irrefutable. Wouldn't it be interesting if a wildfire of dissent spread across the country and the telecommunication industry's resolve and interest in our cell phone and Wi-Fi reception started to become quite conspicuous? This is a very, very important subject, and history will be on your side for siding with the people. It's humanity against the globalists, and it's all about our sovereignty. And we need to, there is no greater sovereignty than the sovereignty over our own bodies from this EMF pollution and vaccines as well, but that's a whole other subject. Thank you. Thank you for being of service to yourselves and to your community.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Richard Applebaum, 61 Woodland. I want to echo what others have said. Thank you for coming together here and hearing everyone out. I don't really want to repeat the many wonderful things that the community has already articulated. I support the majority of them. I would want to qualify one thing that was said by the person who was opposed to the rest of the room, which is that I don't believe there is a silent majority. This issue has been around, it's been percolating all over Marin County, all over our town. It's on Facebook, it's on Nextdoor, and there's been a lot of opportunity for anyone who really thought that we were out of our minds and we were wrong to come down here. So I don't think there's any silent majority at all. I think that's totally bogus. What I would say is you started with the Mill Valley document and you've heard a lot of critique of it. I, too, am deeply concerned about getting rid of things like the smart meter ban and all of that kind of stuff that has already been discussed. But maybe we have an opportunity with everybody who's really up on everything in the room that we could do something in real time tonight, and maybe we can amend this thing and get it a little tighter if you're going to vote on it tonight, even if it's an emergency or whatever. And so I'd like you to give some consideration to that. We can all work together. It could be iterative. I don't know what the legals are on that, but we're here, and there's a lot of information, a lot of knowledge in the room, and I'd be concerned about going with a temporary Mill Valley version, particularly if we're not going to keep the other older ordinances intact. So anyway, let's be courageous. I'll support the police telling people to get off the pole and don't mount it. and let them come after us legally, and let's see where that goes. Maybe we'll be a story for the whole nation. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Push the button.
Oh, thank you. Good evening. Thank you. My name is Janet Fitzgerald, and I want to reiterate what many have said, which is to thank you for your time, for listening. And I think that's what tonight is about, and hopefully going forward is taking this package of listening. So I can't help but think how crazy it is that we are taking our marching orders from a corrupt administration that has thousands of proven lies on a daily basis. And I'm talking about Donald Trump, who has appointed Ajit Pai, right? He's appointed the FCC director.
Sir, please don't make comments from the back. It's not fair to the speakers.
Anyway, I think my point is that I agree with those who have said, let's question authority if authority is corrupt. And I don't mean you. I mean way up, because that's what it looks like, is that you're trying to listen to us. And you might feel like you're between a rock and a hard place, but I think we're hearing some themes about courage and revolution and civil disobedience, because we all smell a rat from above, and we know, and we're concerned about health and safety, and yes, fire. I live in the Canyon area, I'm in a Cascade area on Canyon Road, and wow, it's could be really scary. We know that the Reading fire started with one little spark. That's all we need. How much do we know about these microwave radiation massive antennas called small, right? So what I'd like to recommend is that besides accepting urgency ordinance, I would like to see it strengthened and be permanent in an ideal world. We have to reach for the stars. We can't just accept what we're being told, that we can't object to health can't object based on health concerns. I say, why not? Who are they to say that? So also, hope we can maybe hire a lawyer who is a tough gorilla, smart gorilla, willing to fight and nitpick everything out of the FCC. For example, have they given us adequate notice? Hardly anyone knew. I'll tell you, I called Kamala Harris's office. They didn't have any information. I spoke personally with Jared Huffman, Congressman Huffman. They didn't know. They had to get back. Tried Dianne Feinstein. She was busy, we know, doing what? With another corrupt situation, right? So if they didn't know, how can it be fair that the FCC kind of quietly put up this little public notice and then closed it, all right? And even the language on it, there's a Plain Language Act from 2010, and their language was definitely not plain, and their form was not easy. So that's what lawyers do. They look at these things and they say, hey, maybe not. So let's question and question and question, because I think you're hearing people are not happy. One last thing is, what about a survey, simple survey that the town helps send out so that you can more formally assess everybody, how do they feel? Okay?
Okay, thank you, Janet.
Why not? Right?
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, Wendy, and I live in Fairfax, and I just want to thank everybody who's already spoken. It's one of those nights where it's nice to live in Fairfax. I just want to speak on behalf of the precautionary principle that I don't know if this town ever adopted, but a really long time ago I helped Berkeley pass it. I was part of that, and it's when an activity raises threats of harm to the environment or human health, precautionary measures should be taken even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. And I'm sitting here thinking about that tonight, and I'm also thinking about NIMBY and Not in My Backyard, and I really want to make sure that we don't say, okay, if we don't want it here, but it can be somewhere else. I don't want to be a town like that either. And I already personally live with a lot of serious disabling neurological disorders, so I don't really need to add to it. And when I first heard it at the town council meeting, and I heard that that the ADA can play a role in how we respond, I really want to encourage finding a way to use that too. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Douglas Martin. I was born and raised here in San Anselmo, actually. The first wildland fire came from San Rafael and went all the way through to Fairfax. That's probably Brad Beadle Sr. was the fire chief back then. And I know Brad Beadle Jr. was the Nevada Fire Department when CAL FIRE came to exist. Now, I love all that. Please keep it up. And I want to say thank you to all our firefighters and the people that support them. And clean up after yourself. That way they don't have to.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Can I have a show of hands? Anyone else want to comment? It looks like we're getting towards the end of it, so come forward.
I just want to say something very briefly. I just recall when cell phones became a thing, that in Fairfax, it was very hard pressed to get a cell phone tower in Fairfax when cell phones first came about. And finally, a couple came in, but there was very spotty coverage here, very little coverage here for a long time. Somehow, we've gained more and more coverage, obviously more and more cell towers popping up, probably unannounced. So now we do have a little more coverage than when we started. So it was a huge fight to even get like a couple cell phone towers here. I'm just really kind of shocked and appalled that we're even considering having all these little towers all over town. I'm very shocked that Fairfax is even considering such a thing. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Joseph Odom from Porteous Avenue, and I just want to say that 19 years ago I helped work on Title IX, and we didn't do it in any urgency. We did it over a period of months with a committee, and it had a bunch of hearings, and we had a town manager at that time that was not in favor of a lot of what we did. It was a hard fight, and I just think that taking something secondhand from Mill Valley and other places, while it may have value, I see a lot that's wrong with this ordinance, and I think that maybe a committee just to step back and do it in the Fairfax way would be an appropriate thing. That's it.
Okay,
Joseph,
thank you.
Because this went on the record, you said Title IX, you meant
Title
19.
Okay. I'm sorry, Title 19.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, when we were working on the old one.
Sure.
Back in 1998. Okay.
Yeah. Almost 20 years ago. Okay, anyone else care to comment? Come forward.
Hi, guys.
Welcome.
I've been asked to repeat what I said last week. So I'd like to start with what former FCC Chair Tom Wheeler said on June 20th, 2016 at the 5G National Press Conference in Washington, D.C. He said, quote, "Unlike some countries, we do not believe we should spend the next few years studying what 5G should be or how it should operate. The future has a way of inventing itself. Turning innovators loose is far preferable to expecting committees and regulators to define, the future. We won't wait for the standards to be first developed in the sometimes arduous standard-setting process or in government-led activity. Instead, we will make ample spectrum available and rely on a private sector-led process for producing technical standards best suited for those frequencies and use cases." End quote. Tom Wheeler, former head of the FCC, whose job it is to protect us from such excess, is also a former Wi-Fi lobbyist. He's openly admitted here that there will be no safety standards and testing before rolling out this new technology. He went on to say that 5G will, quote, generate tens of billions of dollars in economic activity, end quote. This brand new 5G power density is being rolled out at lightning speed, with 5G cell towers being placed in front of schools and houses across the country, with tens of billions of private interest dollars at stake. You bet this infrastructure is going up fast before communities and individuals can realize what is truly happening. What is happening? What is 5G? It's a completely new power grid network. The name is deceiving because it sounds like the next level up from our current Wi-Fi network, but it's not, hence the need for entirely new cell towers. 5G is unnatural, around-the-clock, milliliter microwave radiation, far more potent than anything we've experienced. I'll make this fast. Our current Wi-Fi networks generate frequencies of 2.4 gigahertz per second, which produce 2 billion waves hitting our body each second. 5G generates 24 to 90 billion waves per second. No one has proven the safety of 24 to 90 billion microwaves per second interfacing with the human body, not to mention the plants, the animals, and the pollinators. And most of us aren't aware that we are electromagnetic beings generating our own electric fields. To quote an article from Forbes magazine called How the Human Body Creates Electromagnetic Fields, not only, quote, not only is it possible that the human body creates electromagnetic fields, it is the only way we can possibly exist as a coherent entity, unquote. Dr. Jack Cruz, an outspoken neurosurgeon on the subject of our current electromagnetic environment, has stated that the impact of 5G frequencies on our brain and our electrical communication system will be collectively catastrophic. I can go on and on. I'll wrap this up.
If you could wrap it up, that'd be great.
And I ask you tonight, guys, if we could please follow in Sebastopol and Mill Valley's lead in prohibiting this 5G density force. Thank you so much for your time, you guys. We believe in all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then, it looks like there's no more comment from the public, so at this time we will close our public comment portion of the meeting and bring it back to the council for deliberation on the urgency ordinance that's in front of us. And I just wanted to, before we begin, just preface, this is an urgency ordinance. This stuff has been coming rather quickly in front of us, in front of all the towns in Marin. Mill Valley, San Anselmo have had meetings in the last month on these ordinances. So we are trying to benefit from sort of what other towns have done. And so we took a look at the Mill Valley ordinance and we thought it was a good starting point. I would look at this as a starting point. We're trying to get something on the books now that can be refined and harmonized at the Planning Commission level, and some of the more technical details be worked out. And so with that, I know I had some suggestions to amend what's before us now that I'd like folks on the council to consider, but I also wanted to see if other council members did. And before we go into that, also just hear from everyone in terms of any general comments.
I just want to suggest one thing, Peter. I have a few details, but I think you've spent a lot of time on this and have specific language changes. And even though usually the mayor waits till last, I would suggest that we consider doing yours sooner, because sure. I think that would frame some of the deliberations and get us through fine-tuning this or making it better. Just suggesting that the mayor start sooner because he has a lot of specific changes. Thank you.
Thank you. But before I do, I just wanted to know if anyone else had any comments to offer first.
Not specific ones. I mean, I've made a lot of mine earlier. I mean, I think, I think not repealing the earlier Chapter 19, and, as you suggested also, Peter. Okay. Can the audience hear me now? All right. I made a number of suggestions earlier, such as, keeping Chapter 19 still alongside of that, adding, Peter suggested just adding a Chapter 20 right there, and they can be side by side. I think that's an excellent idea. I think you have some real specific things. I think also the appeal process, 60 days is a pretty long time, even though it's short bureaucratically. I think appealing it to the council, if an appeal of a decision is that way. Okay. Well, I think the appeal of decisions made by the planning director, rather than going to the town manager, should go to the council. And I think we also need to amend. I guess. Okay. How about this one? Does that work better? Okay.
Speak up, John.
Okay. Okay, the appeal process for exceptions to it, I think should go to the council. We have 60 days to do that, and I think we can call a special meeting like this. I think it'll be a rare event. And having Chapter 19 still exist alongside of 20 is a good idea too. I also think that the commercial recreation zone, we should look at that because it's basically a residential zone at this time because of the grandfathered residential units on Marin County Country Club, which is the commercial recreation zone thing. That's all right now.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm sorry, Bruce.
I'm not going to make a specific comment on the ordinance, but just to clarify for everybody the process that we're in right now, what's been referred to, Peter's suggestions appeared tonight on our table because we're not allowed to talk about these things offline, and so this is the first time any of us are seeing these. So if we go through them, we're going to be going through them in real time. So just so you understand how that process works. And also, just to say that I know we've heard from a lot of people that we'd like various changes to this. Peter suggested various changes to this ordinance, but there's something to be said for the fact that we don't have legal counsel here tonight and the fact that a lot of work has gone into these ordinances as the towns have progressed through them. There's something to be said for making sure that we don't misstep in our haste here. We will have a chance to go through this again through the Planning Commission and look at suggestions. But anyway, I'm quite happy to discuss these changes.
Go ahead, Barbara.
So a couple of things. I was the one who started this off a few months ago, bringing us to the council because I felt that to the extent feasible, we would protect ourselves from having these unfettered installations throughout the town. And while there are some who would say we should just say no, one thing you have to understand, if you just say no, they'll be deemed approved. So there will be unfettered installations throughout town. There were a number of people asking us to adopt an urgency ordinance, and that's why we went forward with this. So when you do an urgency ordinance, it's not going to have all the detail of everything that you would like. And I guess I might be too much of a rule follower for some people in this room, but I also think that we need to the extent feasible, stay out of the crosshairs of FCC appeals. Garrett has wisely signed us up for this coalition that will continue to fight things on a large level. For example, they filed a 61-page comments on the proposed order that FCC adopted today. So we're stronger because we're getting together with a coalition of various cities and special districts. But also as the chair of the Marin Telecommunications Agency, while we don't have a lot of jurisdiction that's been taken away through the state some years ago, one of the things I'm trying to do is make sure we collect information. And where we can, I'm sending letters to the FCC opposing what they're doing and tromping on state rights, local rights. I also pointed out in my recent letter that they haven't updated the radio frequency guidelines since 1997. It's a long time coming, and there's a lot of new science, peer-reviewed science. And as a scientist, I object to the words consensus because peer-reviewed doesn't necessarily mean that everybody agrees. But it's good science, so I think it's time to update that. Will that happen? Probably not under this FCC. But to the extent feasible, I think what we're trying to do is make sure we limit the fire safety. That was one of the things I brought out in my letter to FCC because we're all experiencing this in California and across the West. So let's move forward with the idea that we're doing something that's the best we can get under the circumstances to try to get something in place. And that's my thought. So I have a few details which I'll provide afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Barbara, for kind of bringing this to our attention and kind of taking on the fighting the fight at the federal front. So, like I was saying, this is a work in progress, but I did meet with Jess Lerner and Paige Hudson, and what I'm proposing, the changes that I have here, are things that we can do at a local level. We don't have time to really address some of the federal preemption issues. I also, before I forget, would also support deleting the commercial recreational zone from the permitted areas. I think that could be removed and there would still be ample space for telecoms to consider without us running into a problem with not allowing enough. So one of the things that we need to do is, I'm focusing on local issues, fire, safety, property values, the things that we can zone, aesthetics things. And what I want to do is also have regulations in place to make sure these things are safe to the extent we can make them safe in their operation. So what I want to do is just go through some suggested additions to this, and I'll just start. And then if people want to just say yay or nay, we can just kind of go through that and then adopt these or not, or delete them as we see fit. Okay, so under the findings sections, and findings are important because that is the rationale upon which the regulations are based. So I wanted to add to paragraph 16 of the findings, the town finds that Northern California is now experiencing an unprecedented increase in the number and intensity of wildfires exacerbated by the effects of climate change, and that power lines and electrical equipment failures are a leading cause of California wildfires, that overburdened utility poles can present a hazard of collapsing and failing, that wireless facilities may present an electrical hazard and or increase the risk of electrical fires if not properly regulated, installed, and monitored.
That sounds fine to me.
I'd support that.
That sounds good to me. One question I have is, does the town manager have this? Okay, just because I saw him rapidly trying to take notes. So I think that's a good addition.
Yes.
Okay, great. Another finding after paragraph 16, and it could be numbered serially, a new paragraph. The town finds that a personal residence is for most homeowners their single greatest financial asset, and that proximity of wireless facilities has been shown to adversely affect property values of personal residences. The town further finds that aesthetic considerations in residential zones are enhanced due to the proximity to personal residences. And my thinking behind that is we need strong findings as to why we're keeping them out of residential areas.
I would maybe change that last sentence because I couldn't understand it. I think I know what you're saying, but the town further finds that aesthetic considerations in residential zones are important in proximity to person, are found important, or?
How about especially important?
Yeah, that sounds good, yeah.
Okay.
What did you say?
So change enhance to especially important.
In close proximity to personal residences, maybe something like that. Sure. Yeah, okay.
Well, let's make it clear because we're doing this tonight.
So
what
change
is the
enhanced due to especially important in close. So 3 words changed to 4
Okay,
words.
so what did you say? So especially important due to proximity to personal residences or something different?
What I was suggesting was taking the 3 words enhanced due to
changing it.
and changing that to say in close proximity to.
How about are especially important due to proximity to?
Yeah.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. I wrote down what Councilmember Ackerman said, if you'd like me to read it to you.
Sure, read it back.
The town further finds that aesthetic considerations in residential zones are especially important in close proximity to personal residences.
Yes.
That's fine. Is everyone okay with that?
Okay, just for clarity.
Sure.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Good with me.
Okay, this is like sausage making in process. Okay, and then I would suggest that we keep Chapter 19 intact, as we've discussed before. And I have a workaround for that. So on line 144 to 146, where it says the Fairfax Municipal Code is hereby amended as follows. Title 19 of the Municipal Code is repealed and replaced in its entirety as read as set forth in Exhibit A. And strike that language and change it to read Section 1, a new section, Section 20 of the Fairfax Municipal Code is hereby added as set forth in Exhibit A to this ordinance, which is hereby incorporated as though set forth in full herein. To the extent this Section 20 conflicts with Section 19, Section 20 shall control and amend Section 19. So my thinking behind that is there's a lot of good stuff in Section 19. If there's been enhancements or improvements with Section 20, Section 20 would control over any conflicting language, and this will allow Section 19 to stand as much as possible until they're harmonized.
So, Mr. Mayor, to point of clarification, the title of the ordinance also needs to change from repealing and replacing to amending.
Yes, thank you, good point.
And then, because you're adding Title 20, actually, it's amending Title 9. Well, actually, you're not amending Title. You're
20.
You're adding 20.
For now, but
For
then
now.
it sounds like the ultimate goal could be maybe to get rid of 20 and harmonize it all
just
into
gets
a
a
new
little
19.
confusing. Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
So I would say that the title of the ordinance would be an urgency ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Fairfax to enact Title 20.
Yeah, that works. So is everyone okay with that? Keeping 19? Okay, and then if we keep keeping Chapter 19 attacked, change the numbers of the ordinance from, instead of where it says 19 ... change it to 20 ... And then one other change.
That sounds good.
One other change along those lines, on page 7, line 221, change from this chapter 19.04 shall govern all applications for wireless telecommunications facilities. Change that to Title 19 and Title 20 shall govern all applications for wireless telecommunications facilities.
Page 7.
I agree.
Agreed.
And Barbara and Renee, were you able to follow that, or?
I'm not seeing page 7 in the ordinance. I've followed everything that you're talking about and agree, but I want to see it.
Okay, I'm
written
sorry,
out.
that would be Exhibit A, where the numbered lines are.
Yeah.
So there is no page 7
is no
in
page
Exhibit A.
I think there
There
is.
is.
Oh, yeah,
exhibit-
there is.
There is, yeah.
It's right here.
All the way over here, yeah.
Page numbering starts over with
Okay.
the exhibit.
So,
Thank you.
right, so now we'll be going through the actual ordinance, which is Exhibit A. And does that change seem acceptable in terms of harmonizing the
Good.
two
Yes.
chapters?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and then moving on to page 10 of the ordinance. Under section, what section is that?
It's B1, independent expert.
Right, B1, line 287, and this goes into the scope of what an independent expert would review as part of an application process. So to strengthen the safety aspects, after the phrase emission standards on line 287, add and applicable electrical codes and fire codes and best practices for fire and electrical safety. So my thought here is that as part of the review process for an application, we want our consultant, at the expense of the applicant, to be able to review it and ensure that it's fire safe and electrically safe. So that's my thinking of that addition there.
That sounds good.
Yes.
Agree.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then in that same section, add a new paragraph. I suppose that would become paragraph C, and then maybe change the lettering. But in any event, the content of the new paragraph, or maybe that's paragraph D, I'm sorry, would read an engine. So these are the things that our consultant would be allowed or required to review as part of any application. An engineering and seismic assessment of the proposed installation to ensure the proposed location, i.e. pole, is structurally adequate to support the proposed installation, and that installation will meet the seismic standards set forth in risk category 4 for essential facilities as set forth in the California Building Code, and adequately engineered to withstand the maximum wind loads that could be reasonably anticipated for the location. And my thinking for this is we want to have, again, our own engineer review this proposed installation and make sure that it's not going to collapse, that it's not going to be a seismic hazard if there's an earthquake, and also that it's going to be safe for reasonably expected maximum wind conditions, because the wind can pick these things up. They can act like a sail, and they can be uprooted, and that itself can create a hazard, and that itself could create a fire hazard as well. So that's a little bit of a technical addition, but I want to see if conceptually people are okay with that idea, and then if you have any ideas to refine that.
I think it's, I mean, are we making this into a huge project like it's a house? That's the one thing. I mean, I get where you're trying to go with it, but what kind of work would this take to do this? I mean, are we putting up unreasonable barriers?
No, it's not. It's a reasonable safety measure to make sure that the thing is engineered at that location so it's not going to fall down in an earthquake, that it's not going to fall down on its own accord, and that in a windstorm it's not going to be likely to topple or blow apart. And I think that's a reasonable local safety concern that's within our police powers. It doesn't have to do with EMF safety, but it has to do with structural safety. And I think we would be wise to have those assessments made at the time of the application, because it doesn't make sense to have it go up and go, oh,
okay,
it's not going to hold up. And
So
Garrett.
just one point of clarification that we had discussed briefly is utility poles. That's governed by the CPUC. They have all their own standards. So maybe you could add something in there, as it, because you have poles, so maybe you add something that they could evaluate it for utility poles, just checking to make sure it meets all the CPUC standards.
I think I support where you're trying to get to, Peter, and I think if I can sort of phrase it, that you've got an existing pole, which is fine now because it meets the CPUC standards for a pole, but now you're adding additional weight to that pole, and you're also adding additional area that can catch the wind. So it's wind loading on that pole. And so the question is whether we've now engineered something that isn't going to be stable with this weight up high, especially now. We've also tried to get the weight down low, and that would be the best way to engineer it. But if the weight, maybe we could even say especially if the weight is up high, but this can also be tweaked later. So I would not object to just putting this in now and then being able to look into possibly changing the wording.
And
I have a
but I see where you're
suggestion.
going.
I have a suggestion that would work for what Garrett's trying to point out. So where you have set forth for risk category 4 for et cetera, the California Building Code, or meets CPUC standards for utility poles.
I think
It would
the
have to be
concern is
and
that-
an or.
Yeah, and
how about a slight suggestion, and is consistent with standards for utility poles set forth in the California Public Utilities Code?
Well, it only applies to utilities, so this whole part has to do with submitting of an application for anything, private property or whatever. So I just want to make clear that CPUC has its own standards for utility poles, and that's why I thought if you just had one sentence that just says, if you wanted to, any placement on utility poles will just comply with, the expert can confirm it meets CPUC standards.
So strike IE pole, and then what was that language, Garrett, that you had?
That for placements on utility poles, the expert will confirm it meets CPUC standards. Because they're quite specific on what you can and can't do and what can be located in size and all that.
sounds like a proper thing to me.
Sure. And Michelle, did you capture that? Okay. And is everyone in agreement then with that?
Yes.
Those changes, so strike
Yes.
poll, i.e. poll, and add the language that Garrett did. Okay, great. Thank you. We're actually about halfway through. On page 10, line 287, adding another paragraph. And again, this is what would be so an assessment of any fire hazard a proposed installation presents to surrounding vegetation and structures. And we've heard a lot of comments about the possibility of these things, creating fire hazards for surrounding vegetation. So we think, I think that that's an important thing that should be assessed with any
I think it's a good addition.
I agree.
Yes.
Okay, moving on then. Page 17, paragraph A1, line 551.
541.
541, I'm sorry, my numeric dyslexia. And this is about, this is a section regarding conditions of approvals for all facilities. And before the language "and approved plans," add language that the following: engineering and electrical plans, schematics, and specifications. And just so people know, and let me just read this in context for people in the audience. So before the permittee submits any application for a permit or other permits required by the Fairfax Municipal Code, the permittee must incorporate the wireless telecommunications facility permit granted under this chapter, all associations I'm sorry, all conditions associated with a wireless telecommunications facility permit, and then in addition, and engineering and electrical plans, schematics, and specifications. So in other words, they need to do the engineering work up front so that it can be reviewed by our consultant. And again, I think that's useful so that we can satisfy ourselves as much as possible that the actual proposed thing they're trying to build isn't going to blow up or catch fire.
I would change the slash to a comma between plans and schematics, and then I think that's fine.
Okay, good suggestion.
Looks good.
Okay, so with that comma slash change to a comma.
Yes.
Okay, page 18, line 577. And so this section has to do with ensuring that the facility complies with the most current operating standards, including the FCC's, kind of output standards. And so this would, excuse me, I lost my place here. So after the phrase, let me just read in context. At all times, the permittee shall ensure the facility complies with the most current regulatory operational standards, including but not limited to radio frequency emissions adopted by the FCC and antenna height standards adopted by the Federal Aviation Administration. And add after that, as well as all electrical code requirements for the equipment, wiring the equipment, and providing power to the equipment to ensure the facility does not pose an undue fire risk or electrical risk. And again, the idea is to ensure that that kind of engineering is also done for safety issues, fire issues, electrical issues.
I think it's a good addition.
Yep, I go for it.
Okay. On page 18, line 579, in that same section, it says the town shall retain a consultant at the sole expense of the permittee to perform testing compliance with current regulatory and operational standards. And at the end of that sentence, add, and to ensure the equipment is operating within proper voltage specifications and does not pose an undue fire risk or electrical risk. So part of our consultant's job, which will be paid for by any telecom, is to make sure that the electrical equipment is operating properly so it doesn't create a fire hazard.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you really want to call out voltage in particular as opposed to voltage and power? I mean, there's voltage and amperage and...
That may be too technical.
You could just strike the word voltage within proper specifications.
Okay, I like that.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, so then striking the reference to voltage.
Right.
And then on page 18, line 579, now
So this one's a problem?
Yeah, so what I was proposing is that the tests occur, of course, upon the commencement of it, and our code says annually, and I wanted to do them either quarterly or semi-annually, but is that running afoul of FCC?
Yeah, I think what you'd be doing is, it's unclear you could even do it annually, but most entities were taking on the annual requirement. To go beyond that, it's pretty clear that's not allowed.
My sense is that we should stay with the annual because, as I said earlier, I think there's some value to sort of proceeding along with all the other jurisdictions. And I think this would be a case where if we can get annually in there, that's a good thing. So we should just stay in unison on that.
Agree.
Okay, very well. Then we'll strike that. We will not include that change. And then a new paragraph after paragraph 17 on page 18. after line 85, adding a new paragraph. And again, this has to do with inspections of the facility, and adding language that reads, if upon inspection, the zoning administrator and the town's consultant determine that there is good cause to believe the facility, including without limitation its accessory equipment, antenna, and/or base station, may present a fire risk or electrical hazard, the zoning administrator may order the facility to shut down and power off until such time as the facility is repaired and restored to its correct operating specifications as determined by the town's consultant at the sole expense of the permittee. And again, there's language here talking about making sure that the facility operates within FCC guidelines. My purpose of adding this is to allow our consultant to make sure that the equipment is also operating safely from an electrical and fire hazard standpoint, and to shut it down if it appears after inspection that there's something that's creating a risk.
Can I suggest one change from zoning
Sure.
administrator to building official or designee? Building official normally is the one that does all the code enforcement and red tags, clearly has authority under building code.
Okay, very good. So one thing, if I could make a note then, maybe that you could take to the Planning Commission, we might want to check this to see if we should substitute building inspector for zoning administrator for some of the language in here.
We could look at that. I think the zoning administrator works pretty well. I think this one, building official, might be better.
Building official, yeah. So in any event, just a small footnote on that. So
can I just make one suggestion that's part, I like what you wrote with the Garrett's change, but I would say if upon inspection, the building official, and I would strike and the town's consultant. We don't want to be having some consultant tell us what we should be doing, even though it's ours. But I think we just want to make a decision at that point.
why don't we say building consultant or the building official or town's consultant?
I don't think the town's consultant can do code enforcement. So I
about-
think you're getting into that business.
I think if I read this, you're talking about this would be at their expense if we used a consultant. Is that hope? So you could say the building official could do it, and at the end you could say, after or whatever, if needed, in consultation with the town's, how you want to phrase that.
Okay, and then the reason why I originally had zoning administrator is because the paragraph before that talks about the zoning administrator determining if the facility is in FCC compliance. So I sort of wanted to make that parallel.
The only reason is because I'm not sure how it works, because normally when you go and you shut somebody down, it's usually under some authority, and it's clear building officials under building code to
Okay,
make those
that makes sense.
determinations.
Okay, and okay, I think that's a good change.
So
then.
you're saying strike and the town's consultant from that second
Yeah, I
line,
think that's
and-
fine. I think it seems like, unless there's something about, you don't think we could charge them for, it seems like we could
I-
pass these costs
I
on.
think it makes sense. So the building official gets their information from whatever source that's not specified in here. That source might be working with a consultant. Building officials do that, but it's the building official that actually makes the decision. That's how things work. So, yeah, I agree.
Okay, so with that,
And then, down in the middle of it, on the end of the line that says zoning administrator may order the facility to be shut down. Just add the word be.
okay, add that word B to B.
Peter, I don't want to take us backwards, but I want to take us backwards one page for a moment. Page 18.
Okay, before we do that, can we just finish this one section and then we'll go back?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm good with it, with those edits.
So can I just add, okay, so just to close this off, so if we say, if upon inspection, the building official determines that there is good cause to believe, et cetera, then it goes on to say, then it has zoning administrator again, and I think we want to insert building official there because the building official is who shuts down these places. And I think we also want to strike as determined by the town's consultant. If we're keeping this at the building official level.
Right, I
think-
agree.
The determination is made by the building official.
Yeah.
Upon
Yes.
the advice or not.
So do you have those changes?
Okay, so substitute the building official for zoning administrator in that paragraph, and then strike as determined by the town's consultant.
I'm good with that.
Okay, and then Renee, before we forget, what did you
Yes.
want to go revisit?
Briefly, back at page 18, line 579, that last box where you were proposing to change annually to quarterly, I would propose that we maybe relook at a semi-annual test.
We can't under FCC,
I understand there's a lot we can't do under FCC, but I think.
but I think we're
given-
trying not to be in the crosshairs of the FCC on this stuff.
Yeah, you don't want to be the head that sticks up, that gets hammered on first.
Well, also, do we actually want these tests to be happening over and over again? People coming in probably with a lift truck and getting up there. I mean, if
Yeah,
this actually happens, the test
I mean,
itself may
I
be
understand those
onerous.
considerations, but in terms of safety, leaving them be for a year, given extreme weather events, and feels like a
So
long
why
distance
don't
in
we leave
between.
it for?
But I understand the other considerations.
Why don't we leave it at a year now, and then if you, Garrett, make a note for the planning commission to consider shortening that to 6 months, because I want to.
Perhaps others will do the same, and
Yeah,
so we
and-
won't be that head sticking up, but
Sure.
I think being more careful than not.
Yeah, I'm in favor, I want it quarterly, but I understand the dynamics. But if Garrett, if at the planning commission, if they could look into the possibility of making that more frequently. And let's see, okay, and then moving on to page 19, at line 599, paragraph 9, and then this is again still having to do with the section regarding design and development standards.
I thought you added that to the indemnification. That's the
Oh, no, I'm sorry, you're right. No, this is indemnification. Okay, so indemnification means that the telecom carrier would cover any expenses or legal fees that might arise from any kind of litigation associated with this, these things. And so we've adopted Mill Valley's indemnification language, which is a good start, but it's mostly around being indemnified around approvals or not approvals. And what I want to add is also indemnify the town for any claims, any and all claims, actions, or proceedings arising from or related to the installation, operation, or inspection of any facility. So if one of these things blows up, it's on the telecom to cover Fairfax's legal fees.
I think that's good.
Yeah, there was something similar elsewhere in this, but I certainly am fine with putting it in there. Proceedings then has an S at the end.
Okay?
Yes.
All good.
Okay, then on page 21, paragraph 9, excuse me, section 19.04.120, subsection A, subsection 1. Currently, that sentence reads, the proposed facility, so this is about findings for a conditional use permit, and these are the things that has to be, these are the findings that are required to be met before a permit can be allowed. So the current sentence reads that the proposed facility complies with all applicable provisions of this chapter. And I want to just add, including the technical review by the town's independent expert set forth in section 1904.05 subsection B, which will renumber to 20, section 20.04.05B. And that section had to do with all the electrical, and fire safety reviews that would need to be done. So that's just to harmonize that. And so are people okay with that
Yes.
change? Okay.
Yes.
And then the last issue is about appeal. And I was suggesting that Frank and a few other people noted that the Mill Valley ordinance has the town manager as being the kind of final appeal decider if the project is turned down by the planning director. And my thinking is that I think it would be good to have a public review at either the planning commission or the town council level, and I'm flexible as to which, if we can do it. And Barbara pointed out that there is an issue with the 60-day shot clock provision. So I would like to have some kind of review by either the planning commission or I think actually the town council. But I wanted to also hear from my colleagues and from Garrett about how this would square with the shot clock provisions, and if there would be enough time to have a review without it being deemed approved.
The problem is it's 60 days, so when they have a completed application, wherever they submit it, then we have to review it, the zoning administrator, analyze it. Let's say we turn it down, then they can submit for the appeal, and then we got to get all that information, and then to the extent you want to do it at the council or planning commission, and if you want that as a public hearing, then we got this 10-day noticing. It just gets more complicated. That being said, you can set it as the town council. You just need to recognize that you're going to have to schedule a special meeting, and that if you're not all there, that's just how it works if you want to be able to consider the appeal.
Garrett, could you actually break it down, like the number of days needed for this? What's the...
60 total.
No, I understand, but in terms of our process, if it came to town council, what would be the time frame? How quickly could we get this done if we could get 4 out of 5 of us together, or 3 out of 5
Well, you could do it at that meeting. It just depends. When you say notice, does that mean it's a public hearing? Then we have 10-day notice. All of a sudden, that's out of the 60 days, you reduced it to 50.
Yeah.
And then you reduce that window we have to find a meeting time that works. Under your town code, you do have this other thing that any decisions I make is appealable to council, but the problem is it's still the 60-day window. And so in talking to the attorneys, it just said, as a matter of practice, most have it like that, at least for the eligible facilities, just because the timing, it just doesn't allow it so you can get the group together within the time frame, especially if they wait till 3 days prior or something like that to appeal.
Yeah, that was the question I was going to ask, is when does that shot clock start running? Is that when they...
It starts right up the application.
So can we shorten the time period, like give them 48 hours to appeal?
We already gave them 3, so you could say 2, I suppose. I don't know.
2 days to appeal?
Yeah, that's a lot shorter than typical. Typically, we get people 14 days.
So that would prevent them from gaming it too much by running out the shot clock, by waiting to appeal it.
So my only caveat is I'm assuming you could do 2, but I don't know if there's something statutorily that says 3.
So there's also something else. So under the new order that the FCC adopted, anytime they turn in an application, even if it's a pile of poo and it's completely incomplete, that starts the shot clock. So this is only for the eligible facilities requests, and those are the ones, there's things about them that is not great, but it's for removal, replacement, or co-location, which is the area that I think is the more dangerous area. But so, I mean, why don't we just put it in as town manager and make town council, don't mess around with the planning commission. I think that's kind of silly.
Bring it straight to the...
And we make every effort. And just remember that if you don't meet it, it's deemed approved.
Right.
So we make every effort to make it. If we have one of these, and it's questionable whether we actually will have one of these in the near future, is that if only 3 of us can get together, that's the way it's going to be. We're not going to be trying to deal with everybody's schedules. So we just have a meeting and make a decision.
Right. And so another refinement on that, is it possible to have the rule read something like, any appeal has to be filed within, let's say, 2 or 3 days, and any appeal would be heard by the town council, if, consistent with, our rules for hearing appeals, and if the if there's not enough time 10 days notice left, then the decision could be heard by the town manager in the alternative. In other words, if, let's say they notice it, let's say they appeal it on, day 51, well, that's not enough time to convene the town council under the 10-day notice required.
Well, under this, it says the appeal must be filed within 3 days, so it's already setting up 3 days.
No, understood, but let's say that they, like you said, they deliver a pile of dog crap for their application, and it drags on and on and on, and it's not actually finalized and actually decided by the building director or planning commission director until, say, day 51, and then on, they file an appeal on day 52. We don't have 10 days to appeal it through no fault of our own, or to notice it. In that circumstance, could we, in the alternative, say, if there's not sufficient time for a formally noticed hearing, then before the town council,
So I think if that were to happen, then it would, I think, need to be the town manager who made that decision, because the council can't convene in a notice meeting to make the decision to turn it over to the manager. So therefore, there's 2 ways to do it if we were to go that way. One is to say if the shot clock is this many days from running out, then the town manager does it. Or maybe a simpler way would just be to say blanket, the town manager can make the decision or can designate it to council. And then trust the town manager.
You know what I'm going to do every time, right?
The council gets to do it.
Let me just ask a clarifying question, because I may just clarify something. So could we have a rule that it's appealed to the town council, and it can be heard by us on less than 10 days notice?
Yeah, so the notice is the key. What kind of notice do you want? You don't have to do, sorry, I was just saying if you wanted your typical notice, then that's not going to work.
Okay, I misunderstood. I apologize.
Yeah. So this is administrative hearing.
Understood.
And so we noticed the parties. I guess we could post something, but we don't have to mail out to the community or do whatever in order to meet this. We just have to post it and it'd be an administrative hearing. But because you are a public body, that would be a special meeting.
So, okay, yeah, I would prefer to have the appeal to the town council. I thought that there was some rule that we had to have 10 days, but we can shorten this statute can shorten the notice period.
Right, as long as, because administrative, as long as you understand that the noticing isn't going to be the typical noticing.
Okay, and we could also notice it for a longer period. Let's say they file an appeal. They have like 2 days to file an appeal, and we could then notice the meeting for longer than, for a longer period if it works out, if there's still time on the shot clock, right? So
Can I just ask a question?
there may not be, but
I'm just unclear. You're saying that regardless of the quality or the completeness of the application submitted, the shot clock starts.
Yeah, under the new FCC rule that they adopted today, it's basically whatever they turn in. And so it could be missing a lot of pieces.
And we can't stipulate that it has to be a...
No, it's considered an application submitted, and that starts the clock.
You can't say complete application or...
No, because they've already said it's just whatever application starts the clock, so you can't set standards for it. Now, I don't think that's a great thing, and that was part of my letter, but I'm sure that they read my letter and it resonated as it hit the garbage, and Damon Connolly sent the identical letter because they asked for it from me. So clearly it didn't resonate, but I think, why don't we do what Garrett suggests, which is put something in here, we change it to the town council, and we put something in about the noticing, there's not going to be more than enough time, so that the town manager can determine the notice period, or something like that?
Or
I think
how
we need
how
to
about,
keep-
how
do
about
anything.
we say, that, refer to the town council or the town manager if the town council is unable to schedule a hearing?
So as someone who plays a lawyer sometimes on TV, no. My understanding of administrative decisions is that there has to be a set time period for an appeal, so that they have notice for due process. Okay, we have 2 days, 3 days, however many days to appeal it. And then I think we also have to have a set time frame of the minimum amount of notice from the time of appeal to the setting of the hearing. So, and I think we can set that forth in our statute as long as it's reasonable. But I think we do have to set a time frame for both when their appellate rights expire, and then the minimum number of days that we could set an appellate hearing after that. So, and I think we have some flexibility with that, but I think we do need those minimum requirements for due process.
How about this? I would just say, just keep it town council, do 2 days. I notice in the second line, 831, it's supposed to say section 17.036. I just forgot to put that in there. That's the section that actually deals with council appeals. So I would say this, keep it like this as you proposed. We'll go to the planning commission and then we'll figure out what are the noticing requirements. Maybe it's statutory, maybe we have to be more consistent with our code, and we'll come back. But as of right now, you'll have the town council with the appeal, we'll have to notice it, whatever we have to notice it, and then the planning commission can figure that out later. I don't think you need to decide right now.
Okay, so, all right, so we'll just change it and substitute the town manager, substitute the town council for town manager as serving as the appellate authority throughout that section. So, okay, so those were all the changes I had.
So I have a few detailed changes. Could we go through those?
Yes.
Thank you, Peter, for all your hard work on this. Really appreciate that. That really got us in a good place. So here's my suggestions. I only have a few, Garrett, and I apologize. I wasn't able to give you these prior, but I think I discussed some of them with you yesterday. So on page 21, so 21, and this is 1904-120A, number 3. So this is this section talks about basically a carrier has to allow somebody else to locate on the pole so they don't have a competitive advantage. And it ends wherever technically and economically feasible and where co-location would not harm community compatibility. I would add after community compatibility and would not incommode the public use or would not harm public safety. So community compatibility is kind of an ambiguous term, and what I'm trying to get to is the terms that are specific, that have a lot of meaning. So we want to say, or would not incommode the public use, or would not harm public safety.
Could you read that one more time?
Yes, okay. So at the end of it, it says, wherever technically and economically feasible and where co-location would not harm community compatibility, then I would add, or would not incommode the public use or would not harm public safety.
One minor grammatical thing, do we want and instead of or, since these are all things that have to, I,
Okay, just
the lawyer
change,
part of my brain is
change those to
spinning.
and, change the ors to and. I'm good with that.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
With
That-
and.
Okay, then I have another one on page 10. And that is in this section on page 10 that starts order of preference configuration.
Line number? That's helpful.
Well, I'm not as good as you on this.
305.
Line 305? Okay.
Well, it starts on 305, but I would add one. So this is the section that says order of preference configurations. And I would have maybe add number 7, or actually, I don't know where you put it. Maybe somebody can help me with this. I'm not thinking as clearly as I normally do. But I would say this, and that all additional equipment would be undergrounded. So all ground-mounted equipment would be flush with the ground and undergrounded within 3 feet of the pole. And this came from the Petaluma ordinance. I think this is the right place to put it where we're talking about configurations.
I think what this is like.
Well, do you have a better section?
Yeah, what this is saying is like, where do we want to stick them if they have to go somewhere? And so it's like saying, well.
I'm open to a different place.
Yeah, so the location would be, let's take a moment, because
It's
that's an
not
important.
location.
No, the location in the ordinance, I'm
Well,
trying
to me,
Well,
since it starts out.
On line 322, E is accessory equipment in order of the preference most preferred, least preferred. Accessory equipment for wireless telecommunications facilities and wireless telecommunications co-location
Okay,
facilities.
you probably
shall
don't have
be,
to read the whole
where
thing.
possible, located underground within a building or structure or on a screened top roof area.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
where
so
that would
why
go.
don't we have this? So instead of saying, and so we'll say that all ground-mounted equipment must be undergrounded, flush with the ground within 3 feet of the pole.
And I would suggest that
so-
language to be on line 327 after the end of the
No, I think I
chapter
would
saying
do it-
accessory equipment.
I think I would do it after, so where it says shall where possible be located underground, and then I would have, well, wherever you think.
I think,
I
John,
think where John suggests is
there's
perfect.
an accessory equipment section. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah.
523.
Yeah.
So 523 says right now, all accessory equipment shall be located underground to the extent feasible. When above ground is only feasible location, then it goes through that because you have to have something like that. But what you're saying is if it's going to be located underground, you want it 3 feet, whatever
Within 3
Petaluma
feet of
said?
the pole, yes. Okay.
Okay, so shall be located underground to extent feasible, shall be located underground within 3 feet of the pole.
Yes.
Okay,
So-
whenever,
that would
to
work.
extent feasible.
So
the
strike
middle
to
of
the
that.
extent feasible and add, what was the language?
No, before to the extent feasible, because you have to, my understanding is you have to have something that they're allowed if they could demonstrate it's infeasible for certain reasons.
Okay, so keep that, yeah. add
Michelle,
that.
did you get that language? No.
I'm not
So-
sure where you are, Garrett.
Oh, so I have it on line 525.
No, there's no line 525. You'd be on line,
There's 325.
Oh, no, Garrett is talking about a different
Sorry,
section
a different
on
section.
page
I'm looking
17.
on page
I'm
11.
under, where I think it should go would be additional design and development
What
standards.
page are you on?
I'm on page 17. Sorry, I thought we were on
Exhibit A,
17.
page 17.
Page 17, this is under additional design development standards for facilities in the public right-of-way. It's line 525. And it reads, and all accessory equipment shall be located underground within 3 feet of the pole to the extent feasible.
And flush mounted, ground flush mounted.
Is that what Petaluma says too?
Yep.
Oh, that seems like that's a given, but okay,
Okay, so.
Well, you could have a lump. You could have a big old lump on the ground.
that's true. But we consider it an ADA hazard.
Well, but
Okay,
remember,
sure.
let's just do it.
Okay, and ground flush mounted. Okay, I got it.
Okay, and then I have,
And you have that, Michelle, on line 325? Okay,
okay,
Five.
thank you.
525.
Then I have on page 15, so here's an area that kind of bugged me, and that was because, so this is section C, antennas, and there's a discussion of utility poles shall not, the antenna shall not exceed 2 feet above the height of an existing utility pole, and then it goes on. But then, talking about streetlight poles, it talks about shall not exceed 7 feet, and then it's 3 feet. A lot of our streetlights are the same size as utility poles. I would prefer that we just kept it all to 2 feet and not have, so for streetlight poles, I would change that shall not exceed 2 feet above the existing height of a streetlight pole. And I don't think there should be any difference in a commercial zoning district. I think it should only be 2 feet.
I think the only issue with that, and from what I could determine, is we have a requirement that the facility has to be at least 18 feet above the ground. We might have some poles that aren't very tall, and so you run into the dilemma of, well, you're saying 18 feet off the ground, but it's extending past the top of the pole, but you're saying 2 feet, and then it's not, it's going to be infeasible. And so I get that requirement. I wasn't sure. Utility poles, I don't know if the CPUC has its own requirements on that. But streetlight poles, I think that's what Mill Valley.
Well, I think
kinda
Mill
considering.
Valley has a different configuration of their streetlight poles because they did that fancy stuff downtown. If we look at our streetlight poles, just when you walk around, they're very tall. I can't think of any that are just decorative poles, unless you can
We have
correct
some
me.
short ones downtown.
There's some decorative poles that may be, that could cause a problem. But I would say this, I get exactly what you're saying. This would be something really for the Planning Commission to really
Okay,
get into, I
so,
think.
so you want to leave it as is for now?
And then we can, then legal counsel could have some time,
Okay.
talk about it. And Planning Commission,
Yeah, it's
if they could
kind of
do
a
it less, I
logistical
will tell them
question.
your
So I'm
direction is
okay
lower.
with leaving it as is for now. And then I have one more change, and then I'm done. And that is on page 19. So, of course, I'm not sure where I meant it, but so what I wanted to do on, gosh darn it, I had a section that I wanted to add it, and I can't think of where it is. There was an area where I wanted to have us being able to hire an independent contractor. At that point, and I'm sorry.
For what purpose?
Well, the point is where we might need to remove these things.
Oh, okay.
So, and I apologize, I have crummy notes, so I'll just, why don't I just withdraw it at this point, because I'm not sure where I meant it. And if I think of it in the future, I'll send it to you to send to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
There is a provision that says.
Where are you?
If they don't.
Where are
remove-
you?
I'm actually on page 21, line 680. It says, in the event the facility is not modified, removed, or located within said period of time, the town may cause the same to be done at the sole cost and expense of permittee.
Where
That
are
works
you?
for
I'm
me.
sorry, what page are you on?
Page 21, line 680.
680.
680.
Yeah, that language seemed like it gave us
Okay.
all the discretion we
Yeah,
needed.
that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay,
So
very
I
good.
have one.
Sure.
That, and I appreciate all those. Thank you for your work, both of you. So just one more on page 25. I told Garrett about this earlier, and so I'm hoping, Garrett, that you can tell me what the section number should be there, line 831. It just says limited to section, comma.
Earlier, I think I pointed out the changes. It just needs to say section 17.036, 17.036. 17.036. Can't say that right. 17.036. That's the appeals section in our town code.
Okay, then I'm wondering in terms of making a motion, can it be stated to, with the amendments as suggested? Or Garrett, how do you have a suggestion
So
for
before
stating the?
I noticed.
Okay, thanks. We're moving on to just finishing the emergency ordinance, and there is language in here about antenna location. It may not be. Sure, it's. Yes, in essence. With again, it's an urgency ordinance, so it will evolve over time. And with what we're working with, I think it works pretty well in terms of the locations that are set forth. Anyways, Garrett, you were going to suggest?
Yeah, based on what some of your changes are, I just noticed on page 4 of the actual ordinance, on line 144, so page 4 of the actual ordinance, line 144, you'll need to change that. It says, it's section 1, it's line 144, that says the Fairfax Municipal Code is hereby amended as follows. Title, it says Title 19, so I'm thinking Title 20 of the Fairfax Municipal Code is hereby enacted to read as set forth.
Okay, so Title 20 of the Fairfax Municipal Code is hereby repealed and replaced, or is enacted.
To read as set forth, so.
Is hereby enacted in its entire, okay.
So what it would say is Title 20 of the Fairfax Municipal Code is hereby enacted to read as set forth in Exhibit A of this ordinance, which is hereby incorporated as though set forth in full herein.
Right?
Okay.
And so your motion would be, my suggestion would be you make a motion with the new title and you point out all those amendments as amended, as recommended by the council, because we have all those. The clerk has them, I have them.
So I'm happy to make the motion.
Okay.
Actually, Barbara, I just want to make sure that there's a little explanation of next steps before we go forward and do this, make the motion and approve this urgency.
Well, what I would like to do, I'd like to approve the ordinance, and I do want to discuss a little bit about next steps, because I had some items I wanted to also share with Garrett, moving forward to share with the planning commission.
But I think it's important for the public who seem to be raising, I understand, but I think it's more a point of order that we talk about and people understand before we go through an approval process that there is only so much that we can do to get this in place and what the opportunities are going forward to strengthen it and to talk about the specific things, the 18 things in the letter that were very well researched and brought to our attention.
Sure,
So
let's do that after we make our motion.
I mean, if we're going to
we won't
do this,
adjourn.
I believe, I understand, but I believe it's not in proper order to not have addressed most of these things, go through approval, and then explain why. I guess if I were to,
I understand what you're saying. It makes
I'm not sure how to
sense.
articulate that.
As do I.
Fine with me, yeah.
That's fine.
To continue with that discussion
What
now.
will
and then-
happen, I guess, is
All right,
the question
go
when
ahead
it
then.
goes to Planning Commission in terms of many of these issues that weren't addressed, and I understand, and understandably, we are not addressing all of these things. Many are in the purview of the Planning Commission and the research that needs to be done with the community's input and all the work that everyone has done here, which has informed this whole process. I think the public needs to know before we just go forward with an approval what those next steps are and what the Planning Commission, what the process will be. Will all of these things be considered at that level? And
broad.
I don't feel that
Why
we've
don't you let-
adequately addressed the
Why
concerns
don't you let Garrett do an
raised
overview
before
of the
us.
next steps, which we've already done, but let's do it again.
Let's do it again.
And
Okay.
maybe do it slower than you did at the first.
Okay. Just let me know. Okay. So in essence, what happens if you adopt the urgency ordinance, what will happen in October is we will take the urgency ordinance plus all the council comments from this meeting, like if you directed us, the Planning Commission, to make sure, take a look at existing Title 19, compare it with Title 20, eliminate the consistencies, recommend what we should be keeping, not keeping, and so on. That's one task. I do know you want them to take a look at, say, the height limits of antenna on poles, some other things. So in essence, the Planning Commission is going to do a comprehensive review of the urgency ordinance in comparison to Title 19. In addition, the attorneys will now have time to do more vetting of some of the recommendations, because I do know one of the things, my concern and their concern is we're clear that utility poles have their own requirements for the CPUC, and some things you can do and some things you can't. So that just needs to make probably a little more clear. But that being said, there will be significant opportunity for the Planning Commission to recommend and take a look at all the issues to the council. And then what happens in your November council meeting, you will consider the recommended ordinance from the Planning Commission as two ways. One is it will be an urgency ordinance that will take the place of this existing urgency ordinance if you adopt it this evening. And you will also approve it as a regular ordinance, your first reading, and then have your second reading in December. And the reason for that is urgency ordinance takes place right away, but in case that is challenged, then your regular ordinance is going through the regular process, so it will take effect regularly, and in essence, you have protections both ways. And that's how we've typically have done these things in the past to make sure we're protected from any type of lawsuits that may challenge the urgency ordinance.
Okay, so I just want to ensure that all of the things that were presented to us that we did not take up in considering this urgency ordinance tonight will be considered by the Planning Commission as if it's going forward from us.
I want us to share the public comments that you received this evening with the Planning Commission. Is that
the public
specifically
comments, and
this letter
specifically
with
looking at antenna placement, because this has been an issue. It's come in all of the emails to us. It's come in all of the education that I've received from the community. So I just want to make sure that gets specifically
We can do
called.
that. Again, my direction to the Planning Commission will be the same thing. They could recommend whatever, they just can't point to environmental health as the reason why they're recommending it. Same as the council, and that we need to be able to make sure that we can say that there's sufficient locations for adequate coverage. And so as long as the Planning Commission takes that into account, they may come back to you with the same thing plus additional things that you wanted under the argument of they believe there's still adequate coverage. That's a complete possibility. I don't see them changing it so it's less restrictive. That would be my
I
take.
understand, but what the public has asked for is more restrictive. So what I'm asking is that not only the comments that we made tonight in considering the approving this ordinance before us, that these public comments also go forward.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, is the public comments you received that you're holding right now, you want us to share that with the Planning Commission?
Yes, please.
Yes, we can do that. All I was pointing out is that the Planning Commission could recommend something more restrictive to you. They just have to operate within the same parameters. That's the only thing I was saying. So sure, we can share those comments with them.
Yeah, and this is a compilation of a lot of people's work. So I think this is a really important document with the 18 suggestions and requests from the community.
Yes, we can do that.
And many of which I've
Peter,
kind of adopted or attempted to adopt. So,
and thank you for
one other point of clarification. Then we are removing the commercial recreational zone from where these things can be located.
Yeah, I believe that.
Okay. So, with that then, Barbara, did you want to?
Okay, I would like to introduce and adopt an urgency ordinance of the Town of Fairfax enacting Title 20 telecommunications of the Fairfax Municipal Code to establish new regulations for wireless telecommunications facilities as amended by the council tonight.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. Okay, it passes unanimously. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff. Thank you, everyone from the town of Fairfax, people that have weighed in. It is a difficult thing. I think, Andy, you said, we are somewhat in a vice, and what we've tried to do tonight is build on, improve each iteration using the Mill Valley Ordinance and trying to take some very good suggestions from the members of the public to strengthen what we can strengthen. So a couple of things I wanted to just address perhaps with the Planning Commission before we adjourn. I didn't have time to try to craft something before this, but Garrett, I would like to ask that the Town Commission, or the Planning Commission, consider how large of a permit fee we can request for these. And I'm kind of in favor of a very robust fee, as robust a fee as possible. On notifications of appeals or permits, I'm wondering if the Planning Commission would consider the possibility of requiring the applicant to do a town-wide mailing. It's an expense, but I think it may be justified. So that's one thing I would like to possibly have them consider. Another thing too is, do we want to consider imposing fines for non-compliance with things such as FCC, output regulations or other violations? That may not be worth our while, but something I'd like to just put out there for the Planning Commission. And then if they could, of course, pick up on the pole heights issue that Barbara discussed, set forth in lines 469 to 474. And then are there any other thoughts in terms of directions for the Planning Commission and
Not
going
the Planning
forward?
Commission, for staff.
Okay, go ahead.
So someone mentioned the idea of a survey, and we do have our online survey forum, Peak Democracy. And I think in this situation, it would be really interesting and important to hear from some of those who may be hiding in the wings or in the trees, and really get a little bit of a gauge, as much as that can be, about what some people are thinking who don't come to meetings. We do have that forum. We don't use it. I don't think we use it often enough. So I would recommend that we do that if you guys are amenable to that.
Sure, that's something that the Planning Commission could consider doing.
Actually, I think we can do it. I mean, I don't think it has to go to the Planning Commission. I think it's pretty clear what we're looking at doing. I mean, as clear as mud, but.
I like the idea, but although I do find that survey tool and some of the surveys we've done to be, as some of the public have commented about, it's not quite clear what you're getting, but it's also not quite clear what you're getting when people come to the meeting. But that's what they say about democracy. If you got to get involved. But in the larger picture, I still have, and I've mentioned this at other meetings, I very much would like to see us not have 5G. I don't think we need to be able to watch HD movies wirelessly. I just don't see a need for it. And as I understand the precautionary principle, it actually does include one more little part, which is that it has to do with the benefit of the thing that's being done. So this doesn't have any significant benefit, I don't think. People can get broadband internet connection through other means besides 5G, so I think that the precaution of not putting these mini cell towers up it's not justified to put them up for the minimal benefit of giving people wireless ability to watch HD movies or whatever it is they want to do. But, so that's why I'm behind this, and very much so. On the other hand, we have a major safety concern that we have major cell phone dead zones in the town, and people are not using landlines, and we're not going to legislate them to use them. And so how do people, and they aren't necessarily watching TV or listening to the radio. People don't even do that much anymore. And so how do people get the messages? So that's a concern. I don't want to, it's not agendized. We're not going to discuss that tonight, but that's a concern we need to think about. I even was talking with a number of the firefighters today and found out that they even have dead zones themselves. When they go out to fight a fire, they're depending on cell coverage for their mapping. And when it drops out, they have to stop and look at their paper maps. And so it's really an issue. So I think we need to, in the larger picture, we need to try to solve that problem somehow in Fairfax through whatever means. It may be sirens, it may be who knows what, but we need to figure out how we can notify people and then get them to pay enough attention to whatever means of communication they do have to be able to get a message like shelter in place, evacuate, or whatever, because this is going to be important someday. The other concern, well, not a concern, but the other opportunity that I see here, and I think it's a really great opportunity, is to consider broadband internet over fiber cable. And so we've heard a lot of support for that. I'm really excited that this is now coming forth as something that there seems to be community support for. And so just to back up to that larger picture, that's what I see happening now, and I'm actually pretty excited about all three of those things.
Well,
Stopping the
fiber
5G, getting some kind of community broadband in, and improving our ability to communicate in disaster. All three of those see events opportunities.
Our meeting next week, we'll bring up the discussing possible options for fiber optic. So
One of those are agendized now, so that was just a comment relative to
understood.
The sort of where we are.
Brief response, and that is that I would encourage you to look at some of the information we got by email that really talked about and dissected this idea of cell coverage and 5G. So I learned a lot from reading that.
I know, I've been reading
I just
email
want to
for
let you know.
days now, and I understand, and that's why 5G is not, it's there because it seems it's there because the cell companies want to take over the internet market. So they want to have vast amounts of data going out. It's not just to give more cell coverage to people. I get that, I agree. So that's a good point well taken. So that's why I'm fine with trying to oppose 5G coming into our town.
Okay.
That's fine.
Same here. I could only add to that, and this is not necessarily something that I support at all, but it's good to have it on people's radars. One of the things that's driving 5G is people trying to get driverless cars and, infrastructure to support that. And I'm not promoting that. I'm just saying it's good to have that on your awareness spectrum. I agree with you wholeheartedly and totally, Bruce, that I think that we can use support for this. I mean, I've heard that actually there's interest from, a very good fiber optic company that they're interested on a county level. I think that can move things, the internet speed at 100 times, not just 3 times, which is what 5G is talking about in their pie in the sky thing. And it's secure, and it would give us a lot of energy savings and communication possibilities, and it would be terrific, I think, for this community, especially if it was a municipal utility, much in the way, I mean, we have sewer pipes that connect everybody, and you do your own lateral to connect to that, and guess what, it works for everybody. Fiber optics is the same kind of utility, and if we see that as something that can serve our community's needs and not just make one company or another one rich by throwing all of our other community's concerns out the window. I think that's how our community can be very well served, and we need to basically turn this on its head and make it work for our community.
Okay, so with that then, why don't we adjourn? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good night.